to everyone joining us today, and to every woman and man out there, silently carrying pain while the world overlooks you. This story is for you. If you love emotional stories about second chances, personal growth, and relationships that feel real, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you never miss another unforgettable story. Tonight's story begins with a man who thought power made him untouchable, until the quiet woman he mocked became the only reason he survived. The ballroom erupted into panic the second Ethan Cole collapsed. One moment, the powerful CEO stood confidently on stage in front of hundreds of investors, smiling beneath the bright chandelier lights as cameras flashed around him. The next, his body staggered violently. The champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattered across the marble floor, and Ethan dropped with it. Gasps exploded across the room. "Oh, my God. Call 911. Mr. Cole." Several executives rushed forward, but panic slowed them down. Nobody seemed to know what to do. Some guests froze in shock, while others backed away nervously as Ethan struggled against the floor, one hand gripping his chest. His breathing sounded wrong, sharp, uneven, terrifying. The room that once admired him now stood helpless around him, except for one person. Naomi Bennett moved instantly. No hesitation, no screaming, no panic. The same quiet assistant Ethan had embarrassed in meetings, ignored in hallways, and mocked in front of executives for nearly 2 years, was suddenly the only person thinking clearly. "Move!" Her voice cut sharply through the chaos. People stepped aside immediately. Naomi dropped beside Ethan, her knees hitting broken glass as she reached for him. "Ethan, can you hear me?" His face had lost all color. Sweat covered his forehead. His breathing weakened again. Somebody nearby whispered nervously, "Is he having a heart attack?" Naomi looked up sharply. "You, call an ambulance now. Tell them possible cardiac arrest." The fear in the ballroom intensified. A woman began crying quietly near the back. Another executive muttered, "Jesus." Naomi loosened Ethan's tie quickly while keeping her hands steady against his chest. "Stay with me," she told him firmly. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole looked powerless. Not like the ruthless CEO from magazine covers. Not like the billionaire who controlled boardrooms with a single sentence. Just a frightened man struggling to breathe. And somehow, through the noise, through the panic, through the flashing lights, his eyes found Naomi's. Fear filled them. Real fear. The kind money couldn't fix. "Don't close your eyes," Naomi said immediately. He tried speaking but couldn't. Around them, guests whispered in shock. "That's his assistant. She's the one helping him? I thought he hated her." Naomi ignored every voice around her, because in that moment, none of it mattered. Not the humiliation, not the cruel comments, not the long nights she spent wondering why she stayed at a company where she felt invisible. All that mattered was keeping him alive. "Ethan," she said again, stronger this time, "look at me." His breathing faltered, then stopped. The room erupted. "Oh my God." Naomi's entire body stiffened. "No, no, no." Without wasting another second, she immediately began CPR. The sound of her hands against his chest echoed through the ballroom. 1, 2, 3. People stared in horror. A senior executive whispered shakily, "She knows CPR?" Naomi kept going. Her arms burned. Her heartbeat pounded violently in her ears. "Come on," she whispered under her breath. Nothing. Tears filled someone's eyes nearby. The ambulance still hadn't arrived. And suddenly, for the first time since she met Ethan Cole, Naomi was terrified of losing him. Not because he was her boss, but because somewhere along the painful line between resentment and understanding, he had become important to her. Even after everything. "Please," she whispered desperately while continuing compressions, "don't do this." Then, suddenly, Ethan gasped violently. Air rushed back into his lungs. The ballroom exploded with relieved cries. "Oh, thank God." Naomi froze for half a second before helping stabilize him again as paramedics finally stormed through the entrance. "Step aside." The medical team rushed forward quickly, but before they pulled him onto the stretcher, Ethan's weak hand grabbed Naomi's wrist, tightly. His breathing remained shallow as his eyes struggled to focus on her, and with almost no strength left in his voice, he whispered something that stunned her completely. "You stayed." Naomi's expression broke instantly, because he sounded genuinely surprised, as if a part of him truly believed nobody would. The paramedics rolled him away seconds later, while reporters outside began swarming the building. Executives panicked. Phones rang endlessly. Guests whispered frantically. But Naomi stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, staring at the shattered glass still scattered across the marble floor. Her hands trembled, not from fear anymore, from memory, because 6 months earlier, Ethan Cole had looked at her in front of an entire boardroom and said words she would never forget. "You're an assistant, Naomi. Don't confuse organization with importance." And yet tonight, the woman he made feel invisible had just saved his life. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who later realized your true value? And if you believe quiet people often carry the greatest strength, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson for more emotional stories that stay with you long after they end. Now, let's go back to the beginning. 6 months earlier, rain slammed against the glass walls of Cole Dynamics headquarters, while Manhattan disappeared beneath grey storm clouds outside. Inside the 42nd floor boardroom, nobody dared breathe too loudly around Ethan Cole. The atmosphere always changed when he entered a room. Conversations died, shoulders stiffened, people sat straighter. At 38 years old, Ethan had built one of the most powerful technology consulting firms in New York through discipline, intelligence, and relentless control. Business magazines called him brilliant. Investors called him dependable. Employees called him terrifying. "Your projections are weak." The sharpness of Ethan's voice sliced through the room as he tossed a financial report onto the conference table. A nervous executive adjusted his glasses quickly. "We estimated conservatively because—" "I didn't ask why," Ethan interrupted coldly. "I asked why this looks incompetent." Silence. Nobody defended themselves once Ethan reached that tone. At the far end of the table, Naomi Bennett typed quietly on her tablet, documenting every correction and schedule adjustment without drawing attention to herself. That was how she survived at Cole Dynamics. Stay prepared. Stay invisible. Never take anything personally. At least, that was what she told herself every morning before work. "Mr. Cole," another executive spoke carefully, "the Zurich clients are requesting a revised presentation before Friday." Without looking up, Ethan said, "Naomi." "Yes, sir. Handle it. I already started updating the files this morning." Good. Simple. Efficient. Emotionless. That was usually the extent of their interactions. But today, the tension inside the room felt worse than normal. A major merger deal was under pressure. Stockholders were demanding answers. And Ethan had slept less than 3 hours after spending the entire night fighting negotiations overseas, which meant everyone else would suffer for it. The presentation resumed nervously. Numbers flashed across the giant screen, while thunder rumbled outside. Naomi noticed Ethan rubbing his chest once, very briefly, so subtle, nobody else caught it. But she did, because Naomi noticed everything. That was the strange thing about quiet people. Everyone assumed they saw less, simply because they spoke less. In reality, Naomi observed more than anyone in the building. She noticed Ethan surviving almost entirely on caffeine. She noticed how he skipped meals during stressful weeks. She noticed he never mentioned friends, never talked about relationships, never laughed naturally. She noticed how loneliness followed him everywhere, like a shadow nobody else acknowledged. Not that any of it mattered. He was her boss, nothing more. "Excuse me," one board member interrupted suddenly. "These revised numbers still leave concerns about investor confidence." Ethan leaned back slowly. "And yet, investor confidence tripled under my leadership." "Yes, but public perception matters. Public perception is managed by results." The board member hesitated before replying carefully, "You can't intimidate the market the same way you intimidate employees." The room froze. Nobody challenged Ethan directly. Ever. Naomi looked up instinctively. For half a second, Ethan's expression hardened dangerously. But before he could respond, another executive quickly changed the subject. "The Harper Group dinner is tonight at 7. Ethan exhaled impatiently. "Cancel it." Several people exchanged worried looks. One executive spoke cautiously. "Sir, they flew in from Chicago specifically to meet with you. I'm aware. So canceling again may create problems." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I said cancel it." Before anyone could respond, Naomi spoke quietly. "There may be another option." The entire room turned toward her. Naomi rarely volunteered opinions during executive meetings. Ethan looked at her with mild surprise. She continued carefully. "If the concern is time, the dinner could be shortened to 1 hour instead of cancelled completely. We could move the Zurich review until tomorrow morning and—" "I know my schedule," Ethan interrupted. Naomi stopped speaking immediately, but she held his gaze calmly. "I was only trying to preserve the relationship with Harper Group." A younger executive chuckled awkwardly. "Honestly, Naomi probably knows your schedule better than you do." A few nervous laughs followed. Ethan smirked faintly. "She manages calendars," he said coolly. "Let's not confuse that with strategic thinking." The laughter died instantly. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around her tablet. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Ethan did, and strangely, he regretted the comment the moment it left his mouth. But pride never allowed quick apologies. So instead, he looked away dismissively. Meeting adjourned. Chairs moved immediately, as executives rushed to escape the tense atmosphere. Within moments, the massive boardroom emptied, until only Ethan and Naomi remained. She quietly organized documents near the screen, while thunder shook the windows again. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ethan finally said, "You disagreed with me publicly." Naomi kept stacking folders neatly. "I offered a solution. You challenged my decision." "No," she replied calmly. "I tried to prevent unnecessary damage." Something about her tone irritated him. Not disrespectful, not emotional, honest. "I don't need my assistant correcting me in meetings." Naomi nodded once. Understood. There it was again. That strange disappointment in her eyes. Not anger, not embarrassment, just quiet disappointment. And somehow, Ethan hated that expression more than open hostility. "You're upset," he observed. "No, sir." That sounded convincing. Naomi finally looked directly at him. "You embarrassed me in front of the board." Her honesty caught him off guard. Most employees avoided direct conversations with him completely. But Naomi never played games, never manipulated, never flattered him. She simply told the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. Ethan loosened his tie slightly. It wasn't personal. That doesn't make it harmless. The words lingered heavily between them. Then Naomi lowered her eyes again and gathered the final folder. "I'll prepare the Harper Group revisions anyway," she said softly, "in case you change your mind." She walked toward the door. "Naomi." She paused. Ethan almost apologized. Almost. Instead, he said, "Next time let executives handle executive discussions." A flicker crossed her face. Tiny, painfully controlled. "Of course, Mr. Cole." Then she left. The quiet after her departure felt unusually heavy. Ethan stared at the closed door longer than necessary before muttering under his breath, "What is wrong with me lately?" But deep down, he already knew. Exhaustion, isolation, pressure, and something worse he refused to name. Loneliness. That evening, the storm worsened across the city. Traffic lights reflected across wet streets, while Ethan sat alone in the back of his car, heading toward his penthouse. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Board members, investors, reporters. Then another message appeared. "Claire, his younger sister, you missed Mom's appointment again today." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Another message followed seconds later. "She covered for you." Again, guilt twisted inside him immediately. He typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, he locked the phone without answering, because he honestly didn't know what to say anymore. After their father died 8 years earlier, Ethan buried himself in work, while Claire stayed in Boston caring for their mother through worsening health complications. At first he told himself he was building stability for the family. Then months became years. Calls became shorter. Visits became rarer. Now every conversation with Claire sounded strained, disappointed, as if she no longer recognized the brother she grew up with. Sometimes Ethan barely recognized himself either. The car stopped outside his luxury building. As he stepped out, his chest tightened suddenly again. Sharp, brief, pain. Ethan paused beside the car. The driver looked concerned. "Sir, I'm fine." The pain disappeared almost immediately. Stress, he told himself. Nothing more. Inside the penthouse, silence greeted him like always. No family photos, no warmth, no laughter. Just expensive furniture and empty space. Ethan loosened his tie and poured whiskey into a crystal glass before staring out across the glowing city skyline. From up here, New York looked alive, but Ethan had never felt more disconnected from it. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email notification. From Naomi. Subject, Harper Group, Alternative Schedule Proposal. Ethan opened it reluctantly. The proposal was detailed, efficient, smart, better than the plan his executives created earlier. At the bottom of the message, Naomi had added one final sentence. "Relationships are easier to maintain than repair." Ethan stared at those words for a long moment. Something about them didn't feel work-related. They felt personal, as if she somehow saw through him. And that unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. Meanwhile, across Brooklyn, Naomi sat beside her father's hospital bed in a small apartment filled with medication bottles and unpaid bills. The television played softly in the background while her father slept weakly beneath thin blankets. Naomi rubbed her tired eyes carefully. She hadn't slept properly in weeks. By day, she managed one of the most demanding executives in Manhattan. By night, she became a full-time caregiver. And somehow she still kept smiling through both. Her father stirred weakly. "Naomi?" She immediately leaned closer. "I'm here, Dad. You're home late again." Work was busy. His tired eyes studied her face gently. "You look exhausted." Naomi forced a small smile. "I'm okay." But the truth was, she wasn't, and deep down she was beginning to realize something dangerous, no matter how hard she worked, how much she sacrificed. or how invisible she made herself. Eventually, everyone reaches a breaking point. The next morning began badly. By 8:30, Ethan was already arguing with investors over a delayed merger proposal, while 3 executives waited nervously outside his office for approval signatures. Inside the building, tension spread quickly whenever Ethan's mood darkened. Employees lowered their voices. Assistants avoided eye contact. Even the elevator felt quieter, and Naomi noticed all of it the moment she stepped onto the executive floor carrying coffee and revised reports. She had slept barely 4 hours after helping her father through another painful night of chest complications. Still, she arrived early, prepared, composed, because responsibility didn't pause for exhaustion. "Good morning," she greeted the receptionist softly. The woman smiled sympathetically. "You look tired." Naomi laughed lightly. "I think that's just my face now." But beneath the joke, fatigue pressed heavily into her bones. Before she could reach Ethan's office, one of the executives hurried toward her. "Naomi, thank God. He's impossible today." "When is he not?" she replied gently. The man gave a nervous laugh. "Fair point." She stepped into Ethan's office without knocking. He barely looked up from his laptop. "You're late." Naomi checked the clock automatically. 8:57 a.m. 3 minutes before official work hours. "I apologize." Ethan finally glanced up. Something in her face made him pause. "You sick?" "No. You look exhausted." Naomi placed his coffee beside the desk carefully. "I'm fine." The silence that followed felt oddly personal. Ethan studied her for another second before returning to work. "Harper Group accepted your revised dinner schedule." She blinked slightly. "My revised schedule?" "You were right." The words sounded unfamiliar coming from him. Ethan rarely admitted anyone else was correct. Naomi allowed herself a faint smile. "That's good." Another pause. Then Ethan cleared his throat awkwardly. The proposal was efficient. For Ethan Cole, that was practically an apology. Naomi recognized the effort immediately. "Thank you." Something about her calm response eased the tension in the room. But before either could continue, Ethan's phone rang sharply. He answered immediately. "What?" His expression darkened within seconds. "No. Delay the press release." Another pause. "I don't care what legal approved." Longer silence. "Fix it." He hung up hard enough to shake the desk slightly. Naomi waited quietly. "The merger leak spread online," he said coldly. "Now everyone's panicking. Can it still be contained? Not if people keep making stupid decisions." His frustration filled the room instantly again. Naomi hesitated before speaking carefully. "You haven't eaten today, have you?" Ethan looked up sharply. "What? You skipped breakfast yesterday too? That's none of your concern." "Stress gets worse when you don't take care of yourself." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Immediately, Ethan's expression hardened. "I hired an assistant, not a therapist." Naomi lowered her eyes slightly. "You're right." The disappointment in her voice hit him again. And once more, guilt followed immediately behind it. But before Ethan could say anything else, another executive rushed into the office. "Sir, the board moved the emergency meeting to 10. "Fine. And media reporters are downstairs already." Ethan stood abruptly. "Perfect." The executive quickly disappeared again. Naomi gathered additional files for the meeting, while Ethan adjusted his cuffs impatiently. Then, suddenly, his hand pressed against the desk. Hard. Naomi looked up instantly. For a brief second, pain crossed Ethan's face. Real pain. Then it vanished just as quickly. "Ethan?" The use of his first name slipped out unintentionally. Both of them froze. Neither acknowledged it immediately. "I'm fine," he said flatly. "You don't look fine." "I said I'm fine." Naomi watched him carefully. She remembered the chest pain yesterday, the exhaustion, the constant stress. Her father's first stroke started with symptoms everyone ignored too. "Maybe you should see a doctor," she said quietly. Ethan grabbed his jacket. "I don't have time." That's usually what people say right before their body forces them to make time. The honesty startled him. Again, it amazed Ethan how someone so quiet could say things that cut directly through defenses he spent years building. But before he could respond, Naomi handed him the board meeting folder. "Your updated notes." Their fingers brushed briefly. A tiny moment. Stillness flickered between them, unexpectedly. Then, Ethan pulled away first. "Let's go." The board meeting turned ugly fast. Arguments exploded over the merger leak while investors demanded accountability from every department. Voices overlapped aggressively across the conference room. "This damages public confidence. We need immediate damage control." "Who authorized the release schedule?" Naomi sat near the end of the table taking notes quickly while Ethan handled attacks from every direction with his usual cold precision. But stress was visibly wearing on him now. His patience shortened. His breathing looked heavier. Twice, Naomi noticed him pressing fingers subtly against his chest again. Nobody else seemed to notice. Finally, one board member snapped. "This company feels increasingly unstable. Ethan's eyes hardened immediately. Then sell your shares. The room went silent. Another executive quickly intervened. We need solutions, not threats. Naomi glanced toward Ethan carefully. He looked exhausted. Not physically alone. Emotionally too, like a man carrying too much for too long. Then suddenly, one board member turned toward Naomi. You handled the Zurich recovery strategy last quarter, correct? She looked surprised. Yes. What would you recommend here? Ethan's expression tightened instantly. Naomi noticed it immediately. Still, she answered carefully. We need transparency before speculation spreads further. If leadership appears defensive, investors will assume the situation is worse than it is. Several board members nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. Agreed. But Ethan's jaw tightened harder, because suddenly the room's attention shifted away from him, toward her, and pride made him react badly. You're an assistant, Naomi, he said sharply. Don't confuse observation with expertise. Silence crashed across the room. Naomi froze. The words landed harder this time because they came after genuine progress between them. One board member frowned openly. Another looked uncomfortable. But Ethan kept going. Stick to documenting notes. The humiliation burned through her immediately. Still, Naomi refused to react emotionally in front of everyone. She simply closed her notebook carefully. Of course, Mr. Cole. But her voice sounded quieter now. Hurt. And suddenly even Ethan realized he crossed a line. Again, the meeting ended 20 minutes later, under heavy tension. Executives filed out awkwardly, while avoiding eye contact with Naomi. Ethan remained seated at the head of the table, staring at scattered documents without really seeing them. Regret pressed heavily into his chest. Not because she was useful, because she didn't deserve that. Naomi gathered her belongings silently before turning toward the door. Naomi. She stopped walking. Ethan stood slowly. The apology struggled against years of pride. But before he could finish, Naomi spoke first. You know what the strange thing is? Her calm voice unsettled him immediately. I used to feel sorry for you. Ethan blinked slightly. What? Naomi looked at him fully now. You have everything people spend their lives chasing. Her eyes softened sadly. But you don't seem happy for even 1 minute of it. The words hit with brutal accuracy. Ethan's expression hardened defensively. You don't know anything about my life. No, she agreed softly. You make sure nobody does. Silence. Heavy. Painful. Then Naomi picked up her bag. I'll email the remaining reports tonight. She walked away before he could stop her. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole sat alone inside a silent boardroom feeling something unfamiliar crawl under his skin. Not anger. Not frustration. Shame. Real shame. That evening, Naomi arrived home, emotionally drained. Her father slept in his chair beside the television while rain tapped gently against the apartment windows. She stood quietly in the kitchen, staring at unpaid medical bills spread across the counter. Numbers blurred together. Stress pressed against her chest heavily. Then, suddenly, her father's voice startled her softly. You're crying. Naomi touched her face quickly. She hadn't even realized tears were falling. I'm okay. You always say that. His tired eyes studied her gently. Who hurt you? She forced a small laugh. No one, but her father knew her too well. Naomi. His voice weakened slightly. Don't spend your whole life making yourself small for people who only value loudness. The words broke something inside her. Because deep down, that was exactly what she had been doing. I prefer this response. Before we continue this emotional journey, take a moment to think about this. Have you ever worked hard for someone who only noticed your mistakes but never your sacrifices? And do you believe people can truly change after realizing the pain they caused someone else? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story might encourage someone else going through the same thing right now. If this story is touching your heart already, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you never miss another powerful love story filled with real-life lessons, emotional growth, and unforgettable moments. Because Ethan still doesn't realize something dangerous yet. The quiet assistant he keeps pushing away is slowly becoming the one person holding his entire life together. Monday morning arrived colder than usual. The tension between Ethan and Naomi lingered long before either of them spoke. From the moment Naomi stepped onto the executive floor, employees sensed something had changed. Conversations quieted slightly around her. A few co-workers offered sympathetic looks she pretended not to notice. Word traveled quickly inside powerful companies, especially humiliation. Naomi placed her bag beneath her desk and opened Ethan's schedule without emotion. 3 investor calls, lunch with attorneys, evening press interview, every hour perfectly organized, every detail handled, just like always. Because no matter how hurt she felt, responsibility still demanded consistency. That was one of the hardest lessons adulthood teaches. Life rarely pauses to accommodate emotional pain. Inside his office, Ethan stared blankly at his computer screen while rereading the same email 3 times without absorbing a single word. Naomi's voice from Friday echoed inside his head repeatedly. You have everything people spend their lives chasing, but you don't seem happy for even 1 minute of it. He hated how accurate it felt. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Naomi entered carrying coffee and files. Professional, calm, distant. Your 9 o'clock call was moved to 9:30, she said quietly. Ethan looked at her carefully. No resentment showed on her face. No anger. No passive aggression. Somehow, that made him feel worse. You worked over the weekend, he observed. The Zurich revisions needed final approval. You could have delegated them. There wasn't enough time. Again, simple answers. No emotion. Ethan suddenly realized something uncomfortable. He missed the version of Naomi who challenged him. At least that version felt real. This version felt guarded. And he was the reason. You didn't have to finish everything yourself, he said. Naomi adjusted the folders slightly. It's my job. The cold professionalism in her voice unsettled him more than open hostility would have. Finally, Ethan sighed quietly. About Friday, Naomi immediately interrupted. The investor summaries are color-coded by priority. Legal documents need signatures before noon. She was avoiding it intentionally. Avoiding him. Ethan noticed immediately. Naomi. Yes, Mr. Cole. There it was again. Distance. Not physical. Emotional. And suddenly he understood how many people in his life had slowly created that same distance around him over the years. Claire, his mother, former friends, past relationships. People stopped trying after enough disappointment. The realization sat heavily in his chest. Before he could continue, his office phone rang sharply. Naomi answered it automatically. Yes? Pause. I understand. She lowered the phone slowly. Your mother's doctor called. Ethan's posture stiffened immediately. What happened? They said she missed another treatment appointment. Guilt hit him instantly. When was the appointment? This morning. Ethan cursed under his breath quietly. Naomi hesitated before speaking. You forgot. It wasn't judgmental, just honest. And honesty somehow hurt more. I've been busy. Naomi looked at him carefully for a moment, then softly asked, busy enough to lose people? The question stunned him silent, because, deep down, that fear followed him constantly. He looked away first. I don't need a lecture. You need balance. I need results. Naomi's eyes softened sadly. And what happens after you get them? The room fell quiet again. Ethan hated conversations like this because Naomi somehow asked questions he spent years avoiding internally. Questions about purpose, about loneliness, about why success felt emptier every year. His irritation rose defensively. You think you understand my life? No, Naomi answered gently. I think you're exhausted from carrying it alone. That landed too close to truth. Before Ethan could respond, another executive entered quickly. Sir, reporters arrived early. Ethan stood immediately, grateful for interruption. Fine. The executive disappeared again. Naomi handed Ethan his press briefing folder. As he reached for it, he noticed faint bruising near her wrist. His eyes narrowed slightly. What happened to your arm? Naomi instinctively pulled her sleeve down. Nothing. That doesn't look like nothing. She hesitated briefly. My father fell Saturday night. I caught him before he hit the floor. Ethan's expression changed. You hurt yourself helping him? It's not serious. When did you sleep? Naomi gave a tired smile. I honestly don't remember. For the first time, Ethan truly saw how exhausted she looked. Not ordinary tiredness. The kind of exhaustion that settles into someone's soul after carrying too much responsibility for too long. And suddenly his own problems felt strangely smaller. You should take time off, he said quietly. Naomi blinked in surprise. I can't. Why not? Because bills don't pause when people get overwhelmed. The answer lingered heavily between them. Educational moments in life rarely arrive through speeches. Sometimes they arrive through simple truths spoken by exhausted people. Ethan realized then how sheltered his success had made him from certain realities. He had money, resources, options. Naomi had responsibility. And responsibility often leaves people with no room to collapse. The press interview downstairs became a disaster. Reporters attacked aggressively over the merger leak, while Ethan's patience steadily thinned. Is Cole Dynamics losing investor confidence? No. Then why are multiple board members expressing concern? Internal discussions are being exaggerated. Some analysts say leadership instability is becoming visible. Ethan cut the reporter off sharply. Analysts say whatever generates clicks. The atmosphere worsened instantly. Another reporter pushed harder. Are employees concerned about your leadership style? Ethan's jaw tightened. No. But upstairs in his office, Naomi watched the live interview quietly with growing concern. Because Ethan looked exhausted again. Worse than before. His breathing seemed strained, his irritation faster, his composure thinner. Then suddenly, Ethan paused mid-answer. Very briefly, his hand pressed against the podium. The cameras almost missed it. Naomi didn't. Fear tightened inside her immediately. One reporter frowned. "Mr. Cole?" Ethan recovered quickly. "I'm fine. Next question." But Naomi already grabbed her coat. By the time the interview ended, she was downstairs waiting near the lobby entrance. Ethan stepped away from cameras looking irritated and drained. "You left your desk?" he asked. "You almost collapsed on live television." "I lost my balance." "No," Naomi said firmly. "You're ignoring symptoms." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Not this again." Chest pain. Shortness of breath. Exhaustion. Stress. My father said the same thing before his first stroke. The comparison silenced him instantly. Naomi stepped closer carefully. "Please see a doctor." The word "please" changed something, because beneath her professionalism now was genuine concern, real concern. After everything he'd said to her, and Ethan suddenly couldn't understand why. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. Naomi looked surprised by the question, then her expression softened sadly. "Because someone should." The simplicity of that answer hit him harder than any boardroom argument ever had. For several seconds, Manhattan noise filled the silence between them. Cars, sirens, rainwater rushing along sidewalks. Then Ethan spoke quietly. "When my father died." He stopped himself suddenly. Naomi waited patiently. But Ethan shook his head. "Forget it." "No." Her voice remained gentle. "You don't have to carry every painful thing alone." Those words almost broke through his defenses completely. Almost. Instead, Ethan stepped back emotionally again. "I have another meeting." Of course he did. Work. Always work. Naomi watched him disappear toward the waiting car before quietly whispering to herself, "One day your body's going to force you to stop running." And deep down, she feared that day was coming soon. 3 days later, Ethan and Naomi boarded a private company jet to Chicago. The Harper Group negotiations had become too important to handle remotely, especially after the merger controversy damaged investor confidence. Normally, Ethan traveled with entire executive teams. This time, he brought only Naomi. Officially, it was because she organized negotiations more efficiently than anyone else. Unofficially, Ethan trusted her judgment more than he trusted most executives around him, even if pride still prevented him from admitting it openly. Rain streaked across the aircraft windows, while Naomi reviewed presentation notes quietly beside him. The cabin remained mostly silent, except for the soft hum of engines overhead. Ethan loosened his tie slightly while rubbing tired fingers against his temple. "You haven't slept again," Naomi observed without looking up. "You always notice that? You always look exhausted afterward." He gave a faint, humorless laugh. "That obvious?" To someone paying attention, the words lingered strangely between them. Ethan studied her for a moment. No accusation, no bitterness, just observation. That was Naomi's gift. She noticed things people worked hard to hide, including him. "Do you ever stop taking care of everyone?" he asked suddenly. Naomi looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Your father, work, everyone around you." A small smile crossed her face. "Somebody has to. And who takes care of you?" The question caught her off guard completely, because the truth was, nobody really did. Not anymore. Naomi glanced back toward her documents. "I manage." "That's not what I asked." She hesitated, then quietly admitted, "I don't really think about it." Ethan leaned back slowly. For some reason, that answer bothered him deeply. Maybe because it sounded familiar. Two people sitting across from each other, both exhausted, both carrying responsibilities alone, both pretending survival counted as living. Outside the window, clouds stretched endlessly across the dark sky. Finally, Naomi broke the silence softly. "You should call your mother." Ethan sighed immediately. "You don't let things go, do you?" "No." He rubbed his jaw tiredly. "She barely remembers conversations now. That doesn't mean they don't matter. She has Claire." Parents don't stop needing all their children simply because one shows up more. Another uncomfortable truth. Ethan stared out the window quietly. "My father handled everything when I was growing up," he said, after a long pause. "Every problem, every decision." Naomi listened carefully without interrupting. "When he died." He swallowed slightly. "I thought if I worked hard enough, nobody could ever make me feel powerless again." The honesty surprised even him. Naomi's expression softened. "But power and isolation aren't the same thing." Ethan looked at her. "That sounds like experience." She smiled sadly. "My mother used to say pain either makes people softer or harder." A pause. "I think life made us both tired in different ways." For several seconds, neither looked away, and suddenly, the emotional distance between them felt dangerously smaller. Then the flight attendant interrupted politely. "We'll begin landing shortly." The moment disappeared instantly. By afternoon, they arrived at the Harper Group headquarters downtown. The negotiations lasted nearly 6 exhausting hours. Contracts changed repeatedly. Lawyers argued over details. Executives pushed for impossible guarantees. Through it all, Naomi remained calm beside Ethan, organizing files, correcting numbers quietly, and catching small mistakes before they became expensive disasters. At one point, a Harper executive frowned while reviewing documents. "These projections don't match yesterday's revisions." Before Ethan could answer, Naomi calmly stepped forward. The previous estimate excluded transportation restructuring costs. This version reflects the corrected numbers. The executive reviewed the pages again, then nodded slowly. "She's good." Ethan surprised himself by answering immediately. "She's the reason this deal still exists." The room quieted slightly. Naomi looked at him in surprise. It was the first time Ethan openly acknowledged her value in front of others, and somehow, that small moment mattered more than either expected. Later that evening, after negotiations finally ended successfully, the Harper executives invited them to dinner. The restaurant overlooked the Chicago River glowing beneath city lights. Executives laughed around expensive wine and business conversations, while Naomi sat quietly near the end of the table. Ethan noticed she barely touched her food. "You're not eating," he said quietly. "I'm fine." "That's becoming your favorite lie." Naomi glanced at him briefly before looking away again. The honesty of his observation unsettled her slightly, because Ethan was changing in small ways now, paying attention, listening more carefully, watching her the way nobody really had in years. And dangerous emotional connections often begin exactly like that, through small moments people underestimate. Halfway through dinner, Naomi's phone buzzed suddenly. She checked the screen and immediately stood. "My father's calling." "Excuse me." She hurried toward the hallway outside the restaurant. Ethan watched concern flood her face before she disappeared around the corner. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Something felt wrong. Finally, Ethan stood quietly and followed her. He found Naomi sitting alone near the hallway window with tears in her eyes. She quickly wiped them away when she saw him. "I'm okay." Again, that phrase. Ethan sat beside her anyway. What happened? Naomi looked down at her phone tightly held in both hands. "My father got confused again." Her voice shook slightly now. "He forgot where he was for almost an hour." Ethan stayed quiet. "He kept asking for my mother." A painful smile crossed her face. "She's been dead 4 years." The exhaustion in her voice carried something deeper tonight. Fear. The fear of slowly losing someone piece by piece while still watching them physically remain beside you. Ethan understood grief, but this kind of grief felt crueler somehow. Slower. "He sounded scared," Naomi whispered. For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. Then quietly, "You should go home tomorrow." Naomi shook her head immediately. "The meetings aren't finished. I'll handle them." "You hate handling details alone." A faint smile almost appeared on Ethan's face. "That's probably true." Naomi laughed softly through tears. The sound surprised both of them, because it felt warm, natural, human, and suddenly Ethan realized he couldn't remember the last time he sat beside someone without feeling pressure to perform, dominate, or protect himself emotionally. With Naomi, silence somehow felt safe. "I used to think success would solve everything," Ethan admitted quietly. Naomi looked at him carefully. But the more successful I became, the less connected I felt to anyone." The vulnerability in his voice was unfamiliar. Real. Naomi studied him gently. "Loneliness doesn't care how expensive your apartment is." He laughed softly under his breath. "No, it doesn't." Another quiet settled between them, but this one felt different, closer. Then Naomi asked something unexpected. "Why were you so cruel to me sometimes?" The directness hit him immediately. Ethan looked away first, because deep down, he already knew the answer. "You challenged me." "That's all?" "No." He exhaled slowly. "You saw through me." A painful pause. "And I hated that." Naomi stared at him quietly. Most powerful people spend their lives controlling how others perceive them. But emotionally intelligent people often see beneath performance anyway. And Ethan had spent months fighting the uncomfortable reality that Naomi understood him more honestly than almost anyone else in his life. "I never wanted to embarrass you," he admitted quietly. "But you did. I know." The sincerity in his voice softened something inside her slightly, not enough to erase the pain, but enough to make her listen. Then Ethan said something that surprised even himself. "You make me want to become a better person." Naomi's breath caught slightly, because she believed him, and that was the dangerous part. When they returned to New York, something between Ethan and Naomi had undeniably changed. Not openly, not dramatically, but quieter things often matter more than loud ones. Ethan listened when she spoke now. He noticed when she looked tired. He stopped interrupting her during meetings, And for the first time since Naomi joined Coal Dynamics, other executives began treating her differently too, respectfully, because Ethan's behavior influenced the entire company culture. That alone carried an important lesson. People in leadership often underestimate how deeply their attitude shapes the emotional environment around them. On Tuesday morning, Naomi arrived at work carrying exhaustion beneath her carefully controlled expression again. Her father had wandered outside their apartment building at 2 in the morning after becoming disoriented. A neighbor thankfully found him before anything happened, but Naomi barely slept afterward. Still, she showed up, because survival mode teaches people how to function while emotionally drowning. Inside Ethan's office, he immediately noticed the dark circles beneath her eyes. "You look worse." "Good morning to you too," she replied tiredly. Instead of smirking like he normally would have weeks ago, Ethan frowned slightly. "How many hours did you sleep?" Naomi placed folders onto his desk. "I didn't count." "That's not an answer. And you don't usually ask questions like concerned husbands." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence instantly filled the office. Naomi froze. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean..." But Ethan surprised her by laughing softly. Actually laughing. The sound caught both of them off guard. "You know," he said, leaning back slightly, "I think that's the first real joke you've made around me." Naomi blinked in surprise. Then, a small smile appeared despite herself. "Maybe you've just become less terrifying. I'll try not to take that personally." The warmth between them felt dangerously natural now. And that frightened Naomi more than she wanted to admit, because emotional attachment becomes risky when power imbalance exists, especially in workplaces, especially when feelings remain unspoken, especially when one person controls the other's career. Naomi understood that reality better than Ethan did, which was why she kept trying to maintain distance emotionally. But Ethan made that increasingly difficult. "You're leaving early today," he said suddenly. Naomi frowned. "I am?" "Yes." He handed her a paper. "Doctor's appointment confirmation." She stared at it, in confusion. "For my father?" "You mentioned his cardiologist was overbooked." Naomi looked up slowly. "How did you even get this?" "I made a call." Her expression shifted immediately. "You shouldn't have done that." "Why?" "Because people like us don't ask favors from people like you unless we're desperate." The honesty of the statement hit Ethan hard. People like us. People like you. Two completely different worlds. And Naomi wasn't being cruel, just realistic. Ethan suddenly wondered how many times money quietly changed the way people interacted with him without him fully noticing. "I wasn't trying to make you feel small," he said quietly. Naomi's eyes softened slightly. "I know." A pause. "But sometimes help can feel uncomfortable when you're used to surviving alone." That sentence stayed with Ethan long after she left the office, because it sounded painfully familiar too. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself standing awkwardly inside a small Brooklyn medical clinic beside Naomi and her father. If someone had told him 6 months ago he would voluntarily spend his afternoon helping his assistant with hospital paperwork, he would have laughed in disbelief. Now, it somehow felt more important than half the meetings on his calendar. Naomi's father sat weakly beside them, while nurses moved through crowded hallways nearby. The clinic smelled faintly of antiseptic and old coffee. People waited everywhere. Tired parents, elderly couples, children sleeping against exhausted shoulders. Real life, not luxury, not corporate image, not curated success. Just ordinary people trying to survive difficult seasons. And Ethan suddenly realized how disconnected he'd become from environments like this. Naomi filled out paperwork quietly, while her father coughed weakly beside her. "You should sit," Ethan told her. "I'm fine." He gave her a look. "You really need new vocabulary." That earned another tired smile. Her father noticed the interaction immediately. "You're Ethan." The older man's voice sounded weak but observant. Ethan nodded politely. "Yes, sir." Naomi looked mildly horrified. "Dad." "What?" Her father smiled faintly. "I wanted to meet the man stressing my daughter out." Ethan actually laughed again. Naomi covered her face briefly in embarrassment. "I'm so sorry." "It's all right." But her father kept watching Ethan carefully, then quietly asked, "Are you kind to her?" The question landed more heavily than expected, because Ethan wasn't sure he deserved to answer yes. Naomi immediately intervened. "Dad, stop interrogating my boss." But the older man ignored her. "She gives too much of herself to people." His tired eyes remained on Ethan. "Make sure you deserve it." Silence settled briefly. And strangely, Ethan felt emotional hearing that, because nobody had spoken to him that honestly in years. No networking, no business motives, no performance. Just a protective father worried about his daughter. A daughter Ethan had hurt more than once. The realization sat heavily inside him. Later, while Naomi helped her father through another examination, Ethan stepped into the hallway to answer a work call. "Sir, the board moved tomorrow's meeting again. an executive explained nervously. Fine. And legal needs your approval tonight. I'll review it later. A pause followed. Then the executive sounded surprised. Are you at a hospital? Ethan looked through the glass window toward Naomi, helping her exhausted father adjust his oxygen tubes. Yes. Another silence. Then carefully. Everything all right? Ethan stared quietly for a moment before answering something that surprised even himself. No. A pause. But I think I'm finally noticing things I should have noticed a long time ago. That evening, after the clinic visit ended, Naomi and Ethan walked slowly toward her apartment building beneath cold autumn air. Streetlights glowed softly against wet sidewalks, while distant sirens echoed across Brooklyn. For once, neither seemed in a hurry to leave. My father likes you, Naomi admitted quietly. That makes one person. She glanced at him. You really think that little of yourself? I think people tolerate me professionally. That's not the same thing. Ethan shoved his hands into his coat pockets slowly. My father used to say being respected mattered more than being liked. And do you believe that? I used to. Naomi stopped walking briefly, then softly asked, Are you happy, Ethan? There it was again. That question beneath all her questions. Not, are you successful? Not, are you powerful? Not, are you admired? Happy. And the painful thing was, he genuinely didn't know anymore. I don't remember the last time I thought about it, he admitted quietly. Naomi looked at him sadly. That's not a good sign. The honesty in her voice carried no judgment, only concern. And Ethan realized something dangerous then. He was beginning to feel emotionally safe around her. Safer than he had with anyone in years. But emotional safety often becomes emotional dependence before people notice the difference. And neither of them yet understood how complicated things were about to become. The rumors started quietly. At first, it was just whispers near elevators, long glances during meetings, small pauses whenever Ethan and Naomi entered the same room together. Then, slowly, the assumption spread, she's always in his office now. He never used to listen to anyone like that. You really think she got influenced that fast without something happening? Workplaces often reveal people's insecurities faster than professionalism. And one painful truth about life is this. Sometimes people are more comfortable believing in scandal than emotional growth. Naomi noticed the change immediately. Conversations stopped when she approached. Co-workers became overly polite. A few executives suddenly treated her with suspicious friendliness. It exhausted her. Not because the rumors were true, but because she had spent years working twice as hard to be respected professionally, and now that respect suddenly felt fragile. Inside Ethan's office, she handed him the revised quarterly reports without her usual calm focus. You missed 2 corrections, he observed. Naomi blinked in surprise. What? Pages 7 and 12. She checked quickly and sighed under her breath. I'll fix them. Ethan studied her carefully. You're distracted. I'm tired. No. He leaned back slightly. You're upset. Naomi hesitated. Then finally, people are talking. His expression darkened immediately. About what? She gave him a look. Ethan understood instantly. Anger flickered across his face. That's ridiculous. Welcome to corporate culture. I'll shut it down. No, you won't. Why not? Because the more defensive leadership becomes, the worse gossip spreads. The frustration in her voice carried deeper exhaustion now. Emotional exhaustion. Ethan's jaw tightened. You shouldn't have to deal with that. Naomi laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. Women in professional environments deal with this constantly. That answer hit him hard, because Ethan suddenly realized how many invisible battles Naomi probably fought silently every day while still remaining composed. The educational truth buried inside that moment was painfully real. Many hard-working people, especially women, are often forced to defend their professionalism in ways others never experience. I didn't think about how this would affect you, Ethan admitted quietly. No, Naomi replied gently. You usually don't. The honesty stung because it was deserved. Before Ethan could respond, Naomi's phone rang suddenly. Her face changed immediately when she saw the caller ID. Dad? Ethan watched concern flood her expression. What happened? Pause. I'm coming now. She grabbed her bag quickly. My father fell again. I'll drive. That's not necessary. I wasn't asking. Normally, Naomi would argue, but fear outweighed pride right now. The drive to Brooklyn felt painfully tense. Naomi kept trying to call neighbors, while Ethan maneuvered aggressively through traffic. He sounded confused. She whispered. He kept repeating the same sentence. Ethan glanced toward her briefly. You don't have to handle this alone. Naomi stared out the window quietly. That's easy to say when your life allows room for help. Another uncomfortable truth. Because for people constantly surviving financially, emotionally, or physically, asking for help often feels like risking collapse itself. When they arrived at the apartment building, Naomi rushed upstairs immediately. Ethan followed close behind. Inside, they found her father sitting weakly against the kitchen cabinets, while a worried neighbor stood nearby. Relief flooded Naomi instantly. "Oh my God." She dropped beside him quickly. "Dad, are you hurt?" "I'm all right," he mumbled weakly. "Just dizzy." But his hands trembled badly. Ethan immediately grabbed the nearby chair and helped stabilize him carefully. "Easy." Naomi looked surprised watching Ethan support her father so naturally, not awkwardly, not performatively, genuinely, and something about that softened her heart dangerously again. At the hospital later that night, doctors confirmed her father's condition was worsening faster than expected. "He shouldn't be left alone anymore," the physician explained carefully. Naomi's face paled slightly. "I work full-time." The doctor hesitated sympathetically. "You may need additional care arrangements." Additional care arrangements. A polite medical phrase for expensive realities. Naomi already knew she couldn't afford full-time assistance. Ethan noticed the fear immediately. After the doctor left, silence filled the hospital hallway. Naomi stared blankly at the floor, then quietly whispered, "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." It was the first truly vulnerable thing she'd admitted aloud, and Ethan felt his chest tighten hearing it. Not physical pain this time. Emotional. "You've been carrying too much alone," he said softly. Naomi laughed weakly through forming tears. "I don't even remember what my life looked like before survival became the main goal." That sentence stayed with Ethan deeply, because he realized something important then. Success and struggle can create different lifestyles, but loneliness sounds almost identical in every person. He sat beside her quietly. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Ethan finally said something that surprised even himself. "After my father died," he paused carefully, "I became obsessed with never feeling helpless again." Naomi turned toward him slowly. "My mother fell apart emotionally." His voice remained calm, but distant now. Claire stayed to help her. A painful pause. "And I ran toward work because it felt easier than grief." Naomi listened silently. "I kept telling myself I was building something important." He looked down at his hands. "But somewhere along the way, I think I stopped knowing how to be human outside of business." The vulnerability in his voice felt raw now, real. Naomi's eyes softened. "Grief changes people." "Yes." Ethan exhaled slowly. "But I used mine as an excuse to avoid people." The honesty between them tonight felt heavier than anything before. No games, no power dynamics. Just two exhausted people finally speaking truth aloud. Then quietly, Naomi asked, "Did anyone help you through it?" Ethan thought about the question and realized the answer was no, not really, because he never allowed them to. "I pushed everyone away before they got close enough," he admitted. Naomi looked at him carefully. "That sounds lonely." It was efficient. That earned the smallest smile from her. "Those aren't the same thing." For the first time in years, Ethan smiled genuinely back. Hours later, after Naomi's father finally fell asleep in his hospital room, Naomi and Ethan sat together near the vending machines downstairs. The hospital had grown quieter now. Dim lights, tired nurses, muted footsteps echoing softly through corridors. Naomi sipped terrible coffee while exhaustion weighed visibly on her shoulders. Then suddenly she asked something unexpected. "Why are you here?" Ethan frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You could have sent flowers." Her eyes searched his quietly. "You could have delegated concern the same way wealthy people delegate everything else." The directness of the question forced honesty from him, because deep down, he knew this wasn't obligation anymore. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. A pause. "No, that's not true." He looked at her fully now. "I'm here because somewhere along the way, you started mattering to me." Naomi's breath caught slightly. The hallway suddenly felt smaller, closer, dangerously intimate. Neither looked away, and for one suspended moment, it felt like something life-changing might happen between them. Then Naomi's phone buzzed sharply. Reality crashed back instantly. She looked at the screen. Her expression changed. Fear flooded her face immediately. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Naomi looked up slowly. "The hospital says my father's heart condition is getting worse." Her voice trembled now. "They want to discuss emergency treatment options tomorrow morning." And suddenly, everything between them became complicated again. The next morning changed everything. Naomi barely slept after the doctors explained her father's condition in detail. Heart complications, progressive cognitive decline, increasing risk factors, and beneath every medical explanation sat one terrifying truth: her father was getting worse. Fast. By 7:30 in the morning, Naomi sat alone beside the hospital window, staring blankly at New York traffic below while holding a paper cup of untouched coffee. Exhaustion wrapped around her like heavy chains. Then Ethan arrived. No assistance, no security, no expensive suit jacket, Just Ethan carrying 2 breakfast bags and looking strangely human beneath the fluorescent hospital lights. Naomi blinked in surprise. "You came back. I said I would." Most people don't realize how powerful consistency becomes when someone has spent years feeling emotionally abandoned. Naomi accepted the coffee quietly. "Thank you." Ethan sat beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Then softly he asked, "What did the doctors say?" Naomi stared at the floor. "They want surgery. And it's risky." The fear in her voice tightened something painfully inside him. What happens if he doesn't get it? Naomi swallowed hard. "They said eventually." She stopped herself. Ethan understood anyway. Silence settled heavily between them. Then Naomi laughed quietly through exhaustion. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I spent years believing if I worked hard enough, planned carefully enough, and stayed strong enough, life would eventually become easier." Her tired eyes filled slowly. "But sometimes people do everything right and still lose things anyway." The honesty in her voice carried one of the hardest educational truths adulthood teaches. Hard work does not guarantee protection from pain. Ethan looked at her quietly. Then, for the first time in years, he made a decision emotionally instead of strategically. "Do the surgery." Naomi frowned slightly. "What?" "I'll cover the cost." She froze instantly. "No, it's not charity." "Yes, it is. It's help." Naomi stood immediately, emotional walls rising again. "You can't solve every painful thing with money." Ethan stood too. "I know that. Do you?" Her voice cracked slightly now, because powerful people always think helping means paying for something. "That's not fair." "No," she whispered painfully. "Neither is watching someone you love slowly disappear while pretending you're holding yourself together." The hallway fell silent again. Ethan realized then that Naomi wasn't rejecting the money itself. She was protecting the last pieces of independence she still had left. Because when people spend years surviving with dignity, accepting help can feel emotionally terrifying. "I'm not trying to control you," Ethan said carefully. Naomi's eyes softened slightly. "I know." A pause. "That's what makes this harder." Before Ethan could respond, a doctor approached with paperwork. Naomi turned away quickly, and Ethan suddenly understood something painful. Caring about someone emotionally means wanting to fix pain you sometimes cannot fix. Hours later, Ethan returned to Coal Dynamics for an emergency board meeting. The atmosphere inside the company had worsened dramatically during his absence. Rumors about him and Naomi had spread beyond whispers now. Executives exchanged suspicious looks. Employees speculated openly online. Even business blogs started mentioning internal favoritism concerns. Ethan walked into the boardroom already irritated. One board member immediately spoke. "We need to discuss optics." Ethan sat slowly. "Optics?" "Yes." The older executive folded his hands carefully. "Your increasing attachment to your assistant is becoming visible." Ethan's expression hardened instantly. "There is no attachment." Another board member spoke carefully. "People are questioning professional boundaries." Ethan laughed coldly. "So now basic respect toward employees creates scandal?" "No one said that, but everyone's implying it." The room grew tense. Then one executive made a mistake. "She's becoming a distraction." Something dangerous flashed across Ethan's face immediately. Naomi had sacrificed sleep, emotional stability, and personal peace, helping both her father and this company survive difficult months. Calling her a distraction felt insulting beyond words. "She's one of the most competent people in this building," Ethan said sharply. The room quieted slightly. Another executive leaned forward. "That may be true, but perception matters more than intent." There it was again. Perception, image, reputation. The same toxic logic that destroys honesty in countless workplaces and relationships. Ethan hated it, but deep down, he also understood it, and fear slowly began creeping into his mind. Not fear for himself, fear for Naomi. Because if the rumors continued growing, they could permanently damage her professional reputation. That afternoon, Naomi returned briefly to the office to organize pending files before heading back to the hospital. Employees stared openly now. Some smiled awkwardly, others whispered immediately after she passed. Naomi kept her expression calm, but inside, humiliation slowly burned. She entered Ethan's office quietly. He looked up immediately. "How's your father?" "They scheduled surgery tomorrow morning." Ethan nodded slowly. "I'll clear your schedule this week." "You don't need to do that." "Yes, I do." Naomi placed folders onto his desk carefully, then softly said, "The rumors are getting worse." Ethan's jaw tightened immediately. "I know, they're starting to affect the company. I don't care, but I do." The words landed sharply. Naomi looked at him carefully now. "You may survive public speculation, Ethan." A painful pause. "But women usually don't survive it the same way." That truth silenced him instantly. Because history repeatedly proves how differently society judges men and women in positions involving power. Naomi continued quietly. I work too hard to become respected professionally. Her eyes lowered briefly. I can't become another office rumor. Ethan stood slowly. You think I'd let that happen? I think powerful people underestimate consequences that don't directly affect them. Again, honest, painfully honest. Ethan walked closer carefully. What do you want me to do? Naomi hesitated, then finally whispered, create distance. The words hit harder than expected. You don't mean that. Yes, she said softly. I do. Silence stretched painfully between them, because both understood the deeper truth beneath the conversation. They were no longer discussing workplace image alone. They were discussing feelings neither had fully admitted aloud yet, and feelings complicated everything. That evening, Coal Dynamics hosted an executive networking event inside a luxury rooftop venue overlooking Manhattan. Investors, media personalities, corporate leaders, everyone important attended. Naomi planned to avoid the event entirely until Ethan insisted her presence was necessary for final presentations. Now she stood near the edge of the crowded ballroom feeling emotionally drained while wealthy strangers laughed around expensive champagne glasses. Across the room, Ethan noticed her isolation immediately. She looked beautiful tonight. Simple black dress, minimal jewelry, quiet elegance, but exhaustion still lived behind her eyes. Before he could walk toward her, two executives nearby began whispering carelessly. So, that's the assistant. I expected someone more obvious. Give it time. CEOs never risk careers unless something's happening. Naomi overheard every word. Ethan saw the exact moment hurt crossed her face, and suddenly anger surged through him. Not protective ownership, protective respect. Because nobody deserved to have their integrity reduced to gossip. He started walking toward them immediately. But before he arrived, another board member intercepted him near the center of the ballroom. Ethan, the older man, lowered his voice carefully. You need to be smarter. What does that mean? It means public attachment to employees creates weakness. A pause, especially assistants. The word especially irritated Ethan instantly. Then the man added quietly, people already think she's emotionally influencing you. Pride reacted before wisdom could stop it. Ethan glanced across the room toward Naomi, then coldly answered, she's my assistant. Nothing more. And unfortunately, Naomi heard him. The words shattered something inside Naomi instantly. She's my assistant. Nothing more. Simple sentence, careless sentence, but painful words become unforgettable when they confirm fears people were already trying to silence inside themselves. Naomi stood completely still near the champagne table while conversations continued around her like distant noise. For a moment, she couldn't even breathe properly. Not because Ethan denied romantic feelings. They had never defined whatever existed between them. No, what hurt was the way he said it. Cold, dismissive, convenient. As if every vulnerable conversation between them suddenly meant nothing under public pressure. As if protecting his image mattered more than protecting her dignity. Across the ballroom, Ethan finally noticed her expression and immediately realized what happened. Naomi set her untouched drink down carefully before walking toward the exit. Naomi. She didn't stop. Ethan followed quickly through the crowded venue while guests turned curiously toward the tension. Outside, cold night air slammed against them as Naomi moved toward the elevators. Wait. She pressed the elevator button repeatedly without looking at him. Naomi. What? The single word cracked emotionally. Ethan stepped closer carefully. You misunderstood. She laughed quietly in disbelief. No, Ethan. Her eyes finally met his. I understood perfectly. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He opened his mouth, stopped, because honestly, he didn't know, or maybe he did know and hated the answer. Naomi's eyes filled slowly with disappointment. You know what the saddest part is? Her voice trembled slightly now. For a little while, I actually believed you were changing. I am changing. Then why do you still humiliate people the second your reputation feels threatened? That question landed brutally hard because it was true. Ethan ran a frustrated hand through his hair. I was trying to stop the rumors, and you thought reducing me publicly would help. That's not what I was doing. But that's what you did. Silence. Heavy. Painful. Honest. Naomi looked away first. I spent months defending your behavior to myself. Her voice softened sadly, always finding reasons. A pause. He's stressed, he's grieving, he's emotionally guarded. Ethan's chest tightened. But eventually, she whispered, people have to stop excusing pain that keeps hurting others. The elevator doors opened behind her. Ethan stepped forward desperately. Naomi, listen to me. No. Her eyes glistened now. You don't get to keep pulling me closer emotionally and pushing me away publicly whenever it becomes inconvenient. The doors began closing. And for the first time in years, panic hit Ethan Cole emotionally. Real panic. Because suddenly he understood something terrifying. He could lose her. Not professionally, personally. The elevator doors shut between them, leaving Ethan standing alone. Again, back upstairs, the networking event continued pretending nothing happened. But Ethan no longer cared about investors' appearances or conversations. Naomi's words kept replaying inside his head. People have to stop excusing pain that keeps hurting others. Educational truths rarely feel comfortable. Sometimes they arrive through consequences instead. And Ethan was finally beginning to understand that intelligence means nothing if emotional immaturity keeps destroying people around you. By midnight, he sat alone in his penthouse, staring at untouched whiskey beside the window. The city lights below once made him feel powerful. Tonight, they just felt distant. His phone buzzed. Claire. He almost ignored it automatically, then remembered Naomi's words about pushing people away. Slowly he answered, "Hello?" Silence filled the line briefly. Then Claire sounded shocked. "You picked up." Guilt hit him immediately. "Yeah." Another silence. Finally she sighed softly. "Mom asked about you again today." Ethan closed his eyes. "How is she?" "Tired." A pause. "She misses you." The honesty hurt. "I've been busy." Claire laughed sadly. "You always say that." Another pause. "Ethan, when are you going to realize work can't love you back?" The sentence landed like a punch because Naomi had said almost the same thing weeks earlier in different words. Two people who cared about him, both trying to reach him, both exhausted by emotional distance. And suddenly Ethan wondered how many relationships he'd slowly damaged while convincing himself success justified everything. "I messed things up tonight," he admitted quietly. Claire immediately noticed the shift in his voice. With who? He thought about Naomi standing inside the elevator with tears in her eyes. A person who mattered. Claire softened instantly. Then, apologize. It's not that simple. It usually isn't. A pause. But if someone matters enough to hurt you when they leave, pride becomes expensive. After the call ended, Ethan sat alone in silence for a long time. Then finally did something he almost never allowed himself to do. He reflected honestly. Not strategically. Not defensively. Honestly. And what he saw unsettled him deeply. He saw a man who used control to avoid vulnerability. A man who weaponized emotional distance whenever situations became uncomfortable. A man so afraid of appearing weak that he repeatedly hurt people trying to care about him. Especially Naomi. Meanwhile, across Brooklyn, Naomi sat beside her sleeping father in darkness. She hadn't stopped crying since leaving the event. Not dramatic sobbing. Just quiet exhaustion finally breaking through emotional walls she spent years maintaining. Her father stirred weakly. "Naomi?" She wiped her face quickly. "I'm here. You okay?" The question nearly broke her again, but she smiled anyway. Because caregivers often become experts at hiding pain while comforting everyone else. "I'm all right." Her father studied her gently. "That man hurt you." Naomi looked down silently, then finally whispered, "I think I forgot what it feels like to be valued without conditions." The room fell quiet. Her father reached for her hand slowly. "Never love someone so much that you disappear inside their confusion." The sentence settled deeply into her heart, because somewhere, over the past months, Naomi had started emotionally shrinking herself around Ethan's inconsistency, excusing things, waiting for change, accepting emotional crumbs because moments of vulnerability made her hopeful. But hope without consistency becomes emotional exhaustion. Eventually, around 3 in the morning, Naomi finally fell asleep beside her father's hospital bed at exactly 5:42 a.m. Her phone rang violently. She woke instantly. A nurse stood in the doorway with panic on her face. "Ms. Bennett." Naomi's stomach dropped immediately. "What happened?" "Your father's condition just became unstable." Everything blurred after that. Machines, doctors rushing, voices overlapping, medical alarms piercing through the room. Naomi stood frozen near the wall, while nurses surrounded her father's bed. Fear consumed her completely, and in moments like that, the human heart instinctively reaches for the person it trusts most emotionally, even when things are broken, even when pride says otherwise. With trembling hands, Naomi grabbed her phone, and without fully thinking about it, she called Ethan. "Before we continue, take a moment to think about this. Have you ever pushed someone away because you were afraid of looking vulnerable? Or stayed too long hoping someone would finally become the person they promised to be? Sometimes the people we love are fighting battles inside themselves. But that still doesn't erase the pain they cause others. Real growth begins when people stop using pain as an excuse and start taking responsibility for how they treat those who care about them. If this story is touching your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications for more emotional stories filled with real-life lessons, healing, love, and second chances. Because after everything that happened between Ethan and Naomi, the next phone call would change both of their lives forever. Ethan answered the phone on the second ring. "Naomi?" He immediately sat upright, the moment he heard her breathing, not words. Breathing, shaking, uneven, terrified. Ethan. His chest tightened instantly. What happened? Silence. Then finally, it's my father. Ethan was already reaching for his coat before she finished speaking. I'm coming. The line disconnected. No hesitation, no questions, no concern about appearances, just movement. By the time Ethan arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, the emergency floor had dissolved into controlled chaos. Doctors moved quickly through bright hallways. Nurses rushed between rooms. Machines beeped sharply through the air. And near the end of the corridor, Naomi stood alone, completely frozen. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself, while tears streamed silently down her face. Something inside Ethan broke seeing her like that. Not composed, not resilient, not holding everyone else together. Just human, vulnerable human pain. He walked toward her carefully. Naomi. The second she looked at him, she collapsed emotionally, not dramatically, just exhaustion, finally giving up. Ethan caught her immediately as she buried her face against his chest, trying desperately to hold herself together. I'm here, he whispered. And for the first time in months, Naomi allowed herself to stop pretending she was strong. The doctors worked on her father for almost an hour, longest hour of Naomi's life. Ethan stayed beside her the entire time. No phone calls, no emails, no business meetings, just presence. That alone carried educational weight. Sometimes the most meaningful thing people can offer each other is not solutions, but presence during pain. Finally, a doctor stepped into the hallway. Naomi stood immediately. How is he? The doctor removed his glasses slowly. We stabilized him. Relief hit her so hard, her knees almost gave out again. But the doctor's expression remained serious. The next 24 hours are critical. Fear returned instantly. Naomi nodded weakly. Can I see him? Yes. The doctor hesitated. But you should prepare yourself emotionally. His condition is progressing. Progressing. Another soft medical word carrying devastating meaning. Naomi entered the room quietly. Her father looked smaller somehow beneath hospital blankets and medical wires. Fragile. Ethan watched from the doorway, while Naomi sat beside the bed gripping her father's hand gently. The room felt painfully intimate. A daughter, terrified of losing the last parent she had left. And suddenly, Ethan thought about his own mother. How many appointments he skipped. How many calls he ignored. How many opportunities for connection he sacrificed chasing meaningless achievements. Regret settled heavily inside him. Hours passed quietly. Near sunrise, Naomi finally fell asleep, sitting upright beside the bed. Ethan watched her for several moments. Even exhausted, she still looked like someone carrying responsibilities nobody fully understood. He noticed the small things now. The way stress hollowed her face lately. The tension she constantly held in her shoulders. The emotional fatigue hidden beneath professionalism. And guilt hit him again. Because instead of making her life easier, he had often added to the weight she already carried. Around 8:30 in the morning, Ethan stepped outside briefly to answer a flood of missed calls from work. Sir, where are you? One executive demanded immediately. At the hospital. A pause. With Naomi. Irritation surged instantly. Yes. Another silence followed. Then carefully, the board's becoming concerned about appearances again. Ethan stared blankly through the hospital window. For the first time in years, corporate politics sounded unbelievably empty to him. Her father might die, he said coldly. And you're discussing appearances? The executive stumbled awkwardly. I just meant investors are asking questions. Then tell investors to survive one morning without controlling everything. He hung up, hard, and suddenly Ethan realized something important. His priorities were changing. Not through motivational speeches, not through success, through human connection. Inside the hospital room, Naomi woke slowly and found Ethan returning with coffee. You stayed. The words came out quietly, almost disbelieving. Ethan handed her the cup gently. Of course I stayed. Naomi stared at him for a moment, then softly admitted, I wasn't sure you would. The honesty hurt, because he understood why she doubted him. Consistency matters more than promises. And Ethan's history gave people reasons not to trust emotional permanence. I'm trying, he said quietly. Naomi looked down at the coffee cup in her hands. I know. The softness in her voice felt fragile now. Not fully trusting, not fully distant, somewhere painfully in between. Then her father stirred weakly. Naomi? She immediately moved closer. I'm here, Dad. The older man's tired eyes shifted toward Ethan, standing nearby. You came back too? Ethan nodded respectfully. Yes, sir. A faint smile crossed the older man's face. Good. Naomi brushed tears from her eyes quickly. Her father looked between them slowly, then whispered something that silenced both instantly. Don't waste time pretending feelings aren't real. Naomi froze. Ethan looked away first. Because, suddenly, the room felt too honest, too emotionally exposed. Her father coughed weakly before continuing, "Life becomes very short, very quickly. Educational truth often arrives hardest from people nearing the end of their own certainty." Neither Naomi nor Ethan argued with him, because deep down, both already knew emotional lines had blurred between them long ago. Later that afternoon, Ethan reluctantly returned to Coal Dynamics for an emergency shareholders event already scheduled weeks earlier. The irony unsettled him deeply. Inside the luxury ballroom downtown, wealthy investors laughed beside expensive decorations while Naomi sat in a hospital room, praying her father survived another night. The contrast felt disgusting suddenly. Ethan adjusted his tie mechanically while executives discussed stock movement around him. "You seem distracted," one board member observed. "I am. Investors noticed your absence this morning." Ethan barely reacted. For once, image management no longer felt important enough to fake concern over. The event officially began at 7 o'clock. Media cameras flashed. Executives gave speeches. Investors applauded polished presentations. And Ethan stood center stage feeling emotionally disconnected from all of it. Then suddenly, pain exploded through his chest. Sharp, violent, his breath caught instantly. The room blurred slightly. Ethan grabbed the edge of the podium hard. Applause faded into distant noise. A dangerous pressure spread through his left arm. Panic flickered inside him. Not because of pain, because suddenly he remembered Naomi's warnings. Chest pain, exhaustion, stress. He should have listened. Someone near the front frowned. "Mr. Cole?" Ethan tried speaking. Couldn't. The ballroom lights blurred harder. His heartbeat became irregular, violent, wrong. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt truly powerless. Then everything collapsed. The podium shook violently. Gasps exploded across the ballroom. And Ethan hit the floor. The ballroom erupted instantly. People screamed. Chairs scraped violently across marble floors. Executives rushed forward in panic, while cameras continued flashing in confusion. "Call 911. Oh my God. Move back." Ethan barely heard any of it. The pain consuming his chest felt unbearable now. Heavy, crushing. As if his body had finally declared war against every year of stress, exhaustion, and emotional neglect. He forced it to survive. His vision blurred badly. Faces became shapes. Voices became echoes. And somewhere, through the chaos, one terrifying thought repeated inside his mind. "I'm dying." For a man who spent years controlling everything around him, the helplessness felt horrifying. Then suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Ethan!" Naomi. His eyes struggled toward the sound, and relief hit him so hard it almost hurt more than fear itself. She rushed through the crowd immediately, still wearing yesterday's clothes from the hospital. Hair messy, face exhausted, eyes terrified. She must have come straight from her father's room after hearing the news alert. And despite everything between them, despite the humiliation, despite the confusion, despite the emotional damage, she came, without hesitation. Naomi dropped beside him instantly. "Stay with me." Her hands trembled against his chest, while guests surrounded them helplessly. "Ambulance is coming," someone shouted. Ethan tried breathing. Failed. Panic exploded harder inside him. Naomi looked directly into his eyes. "Look at me." Her voice remained firm, despite fear. "Do not close your eyes." His fingers grabbed her wrist weakly, and suddenly memories flashed violently through his mind. His father's funeral, Claire crying alone, his mother waiting for phone calls he never returned, Naomi standing hurt beside elevator doors, years disappearing into work that suddenly meant nothing at all. Regret crashed into him harder than pain, because near death strips people down brutally fast, and Ethan suddenly understood exactly what mattered. Not money, not status, not control. People, the people he kept pushing away. His breathing failed again, suddenly. Naomi's expression changed instantly. "No, no, no." The room exploded with panic. "He's not breathing." "Oh my God!" Without wasting a second, Naomi began CPR immediately. Compressions, steady, focused. People stared in shock. She knows CPR? Where are the paramedics? Naomi ignored everything around her. Her arms burned already. Her heart pounded violently, but she refused to stop. "Come on, Ethan." Nothing. Tears filled her eyes. Because somewhere along the painful journey between resentment and connection, she had fallen in love with him. Not with the CEO, not with the money, with the broken human being beneath all the armor. And the thought of losing him terrified her. "Please," she whispered desperately while continuing compressions. Then, suddenly, Ethan gasped violently. Air rushed back into his lungs. The ballroom erupted in relieved cries. Naomi nearly collapsed from relief herself. Seconds later, paramedics stormed through the crowd. Move! Medical teams surrounded Ethan quickly. Machines. Oxygen. Voices overlapping rapidly. Pulse unstable. Possible cardiac event. We need transport immediately. But before they lifted him onto the stretcher, Ethan grabbed Naomi's wrist weakly. His eyes struggled to focus on her face, and with almost no strength left, he whispered, "You stayed." Naomi's expression shattered emotionally, because he sounded genuinely surprised, as if some part of him truly believed she would leave him the same way he'd emotionally pushed everyone else away. Tears slid down her face quietly. "Of course I stayed." The paramedics rushed him away moments later, and suddenly Naomi found herself standing alone again in the center of chaos. Executives panicked around her. Reporters swarmed outside. Phones rang endlessly. But none of it mattered, because all she could think was, please don't die. At the hospital, doctors worked on Ethan for nearly 2 exhausting hours. Naomi waited outside alone, still wearing bloodstains from helping him, still shaking slightly from fear. Claire arrived first. The resemblance between her and Ethan became obvious immediately despite different personalities. Same eyes, same guarded sadness. "You're Naomi." Naomi stood quickly. "Yes." Claire looked at her carefully, then quietly said, "He talks about you." Surprise crossed Naomi's face instantly. "He does?" More than he realizes. The statement carried painful honesty. Claire sat beside her slowly. "I haven't seen my brother emotionally attached to anyone in years." Naomi looked down quietly. "It's complicated." Claire laughed softly. "With Ethan?" "I assumed." For several minutes, silence settled between them. Then Claire finally asked, "Did he really collapse during a speech?" Naomi nodded weakly. "He's been ignoring symptoms for months." Claire closed her eyes briefly in frustration. "He's always done this." A pause. "He thinks being needed means being allowed to destroy himself." Educational truth lived inside that sentence too. Many high-achieving people confuse self-destruction with responsibility. Eventually, the doctor finally approached. Both women stood immediately. "He's stable." Relief flooded through Naomi so intensely she almost cried again. "But," the doctor continued carefully, "Mr. Cole experienced a serious cardiac episode brought on by prolonged stress, exhaustion, and lifestyle neglect." Claire sighed heavily. The doctor looked between them. "If he continues living the same way, this will happen again." A pause. "And next time may be worse." The warning settled heavily into the silence. Hours later, Naomi finally entered Ethan's hospital room quietly. Machines beeped softly around him, while city lights glowed faintly beyond the window. For the first time since she met him, Ethan looked fragile, human, not intimidating, not powerful, just tired. His eyes opened slowly when he sensed movement. Naomi stepped closer immediately. "You scared everyone." His weak smile barely appeared. "Mostly you." She tried not to cry again. "You almost died." The reality of those words hit both of them heavily. Ethan looked at her quietly for several moments, then softly admitted, "I thought I was alone." Naomi's chest tightened painfully, because she understood exactly what he meant. People can spend years surrounded by employees, success, attention, and noise, while still feeling emotionally abandoned inside. "You're not alone," she whispered. Ethan's eyes filled slightly, and finally, the emotional walls he spent years building began breaking completely. "I'm sorry," he said weakly, "for all of it." Naomi looked down. "The meetings." His voice trembled slightly now. "The embarrassment. The way I treated you." A painful pause. "You deserved better from me." Real accountability sounds different from performative apologies. There were no excuses in Ethan's voice tonight. No self-defense. No manipulation. Just truth. Naomi felt tears rise again quietly. "I know you were hurting too," she admitted softly. "That doesn't justify hurting you." "No." She nodded slowly. "It doesn't." Silence settled gently around them. Then Ethan asked something that revealed more vulnerability than anything else he'd ever admitted. "Was I too late?" Naomi looked at him carefully. And deep down, she honestly didn't know the answer anymore. Ethan's recovery forced the entire company to slow down. Doctors ordered strict medical restrictions, reduced stress, limited work hours, mandatory therapy, diet changes, rest. At first, Ethan hated every second of it. Not because the advice was unreasonable, because slowing down meant sitting alone with thoughts he spent years outrunning. And silence can become terrifying when people finally hear the emotional damage beneath constant productivity. 3 weeks after the cardiac episode, Ethan returned briefly to Cole Dynamics. The atmosphere inside the building shifted immediately when employees saw him. Not fear this time, concern. People spoke softer around him now. Executives watched him carefully. Even the board members seemed unsettled by how fragile mortality suddenly made power look. Educational truth. Sometimes people only recognize humanity in others after witnessing vulnerability. Inside his office, Ethan stared at the skyline quietly while untouched paperwork covered his desk. For years this office made him feel successful. Now it mostly reminded him how close he came to dying alone in a crowded room. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Naomi stepped inside carrying coffee and revised schedules. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The emotional space between them had changed after the hospital. Softer, more honest, but also fragile. Because once painful truths are finally spoken aloud, people can no longer hide behind old versions of themselves. You're supposed to avoid stress, Naomi said gently while setting down the folders. I'm sitting. You're glaring at spreadsheets like they personally offended you. A faint smile touched Ethan's face. That's basically resting for me. Naomi laughed softly. And suddenly, both of them felt how natural this had become. Too natural. That realization frightened Naomi more than Ethan understood. Because emotionally complicated relationships often feel safest right before reality makes them impossible. How's your father? Ethan asked quietly. The warmth faded from Naomi's face instantly. Worse. One word, heavy enough to darken the entire room. Ethan stood slowly. What happened? He keeps forgetting things. Her voice remained calm, but barely. Yesterday, he forgot my birthday. A pause, then apologized for forgetting my mother's too. Pain flickered behind her eyes. Ethan stepped closer carefully. Naomi. She looked away immediately. Because grief becomes dangerous when people finally witness it too closely. I'm okay. No. You're exhausted, and you're recovering from almost dying. She forced a tired smile. Neither of us is exactly thriving right now. Silence settled briefly. Then Ethan made a quiet decision. Take a leave of absence. Naomi looked up sharply. I can't. Yes, you can. My father's treatment already drained savings. I'll make sure your salary continues. The offer came sincerely, but Naomi's expression tightened immediately. There it is again. Ethan frowned slightly. What? You trying to rescue people instead of understanding them? The statement caught him off guard. I'm trying to help. I know. Her eyes softened sadly. But sometimes help feels uneven when one person holds all the power. Educational truth. Healthy relationships require emotional balance, not silent indebtedness. Ethan looked at her carefully, then quietly asked, What do you need from me? The question stunned her, because most people offered solutions before understanding emotional needs. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly. Consistency. The honesty of the answer settled deeply between them. Not money, not dramatic gestures. Consistency. Showing up. Listening, staying emotionally honest, simple things many people fail to give each other. Ethan nodded slowly. I'm trying. I know. And that was the complicated part. He really was trying now. But growth does not erase damage overnight. That evening, Ethan did something nobody expected. He traveled to Boston, alone. No assistants, no business meetings. Just one overnight bag and years of guilt sitting heavily inside him. Claire opened the door looking genuinely shocked. You actually came? I said I would, after only cancelling 6 times. Fair. Ethan stepped inside quietly. Their mother sat near the living room window wrapped in blankets while old jazz music played softly nearby. She looked smaller than he remembered. Fragile. Age and illness had quietly stolen time while Ethan buried himself in work, pretending opportunities for connection would always exist later. His mother looked up slowly and smiled. Ethan. The softness in her voice nearly broke him instantly. He crossed the room quietly and hugged her carefully. For several seconds, she simply held him. No anger, no guilt, just relief. Educational truth. Sometimes the people we neglect still love us anyway. And that realization can become devastating. Later that night, Claire and Ethan sat in the kitchen drinking coffee while rain tapped softly against the windows. You changed, Claire said quietly. Ethan stared into his cup. I almost died. That wasn't the only reason. He thought about Naomi immediately. No, he admitted. Claire studied him carefully. She matters to you. More statement than question. Ethan nodded slowly. I think I spent years becoming someone emotionally impossible to love. A painful pause. And she still cared about me anyway. Claire smiled sadly. Good people usually do. The words stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, back in New York, Naomi sat beside her father's bed, listening to weak breathing fill the quiet apartment. The television played softly in the background, but neither of them watched it. Her father looked exhausted now, smaller every week. Naomi? I'm here. He looked toward her slowly. You love him. The words startled her completely. What? That man. A faint, tired smile crossed his face. You love him. Naomi looked away, immediately, because denying it felt pointless now, but admitting it out loud terrified her. He's complicated. Her father chuckled weakly. So are you. She smiled through forming tears, then quietly whispered something she hadn't admitted even to herself fully before. I don't know if loving someone who hurt me makes me strong or foolish. Her father reached for her hand gently. Depends. A pause. Is he becoming better because of it? Naomi thought about Ethan apologizing in the hospital, about him finally visiting his family, about the vulnerability slowly replacing arrogance. Yes, she admitted softly. Her father nodded once. Then, maybe love isn't about finding perfect people. His tired eyes closed briefly. Maybe it's about finding people willing to grow. The apartment fell quiet again, and deep down, Naomi desperately hoped Ethan truly was growing, because if he wasn't, loving him would eventually destroy her emotionally. Winter arrived quietly across New York. The city lights looked colder now, the air sharper, the nights longer, and somewhere between hospital visits, therapy sessions, board meetings, and exhaustion, Ethan and Naomi began drifting into something emotionally dangerous again. Not officially, not physically, but emotionally. Phone calls lasted longer than necessary. Conversations became softer. Silences felt intimate instead of awkward. And for a while, both of them almost believed healing might be enough to save whatever existed between them, until life intervened again. It happened on a Thursday morning. Naomi arrived at the hospital carrying fresh clothes and coffee for her father, but something felt wrong immediately. Too quiet. Machines beeped softly beside the bed, while nurses moved carefully around the room, and her father wasn't responding. Fear exploded inside her instantly. Dad? Nothing. Dad? A nurse turned toward her slowly, and Naomi knew, before anyone spoke, before doctors explained, before reality fully landed, she knew. By noon, her father was gone. The grief hit differently than Naomi expected. Not loud, not dramatic, just emptiness. Heavy, numb, silent. Because when someone spends years preparing themselves emotionally to lose a loved one, the actual loss sometimes arrives like exhaustion instead of shock. Ethan reached the hospital 20 minutes after her call. He found Naomi sitting alone beside the empty hospital bed, staring blankly at folded blankets. No tears anymore. That scared him more. Naomi. She looked up slowly. He's gone. The quietness in her voice broke something inside him. Ethan sat beside her immediately and pulled her into his arms without thinking. This time, she didn't resist at all. She simply collapsed against him, emotionally. And for several minutes, neither spoke. Because some pain exists beyond language. Educational truth. Grief is not something people get over. It's something they slowly learn to carry differently. The funeral happened 3 days later, beneath grey skies and freezing rain. Very few people attended. A couple neighbors, old church friends, one distant cousin. And Ethan, he stood quietly near the back, while Naomi greeted guests with exhausted politeness. She looked emotionally hollow now, as if years of caregiving finally ended, and left her unsure who she was, without constant survival responsibilities. After the service, Naomi remained alone beside the grave long after everyone else left. Ethan approached carefully. You should go inside. It's freezing. Naomi stared at the headstone silently. For the first time in years, nobody needs me anymore. The sentence carried devastating emptiness, because many caregivers lose parts of their identity caring for others. And when that responsibility suddenly disappears, the silence afterward can feel unbearable. Ethan stepped closer. You're allowed to need people too. Naomi laughed quietly through tears. I don't even know how anymore. He wanted to say, then let me learn with you. But something stopped him. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Because despite everything changing between them, he still remembered the woman crying beside elevator doors, after he publicly reduced her to nothing more than an assistant. Some damage lingers longer than apologies. Weeks passed. Naomi returned to work eventually, but something about her had changed permanently. She became quieter, more emotionally distant, less willing to stay late talking with Ethan. Not cold, just emotionally tired. And Ethan noticed every second of it. One evening, he found her alone, organizing files after everyone else left. You missed dinner again, he observed. Naomi didn't look up. I wasn't hungry. You've said that 3 nights this week. She continued sorting paperwork silently. Ethan stepped closer. Talk to me. That finally made her stop moving. Slowly, Naomi looked at him. And for the first time since her father died, real frustration surfaced. What exactly do you want from me, Ethan? The question caught him off guard. I want to help. You keep saying that. Her eyes filled slowly. But you still don't understand. Then explain it to me. Naomi exhaled shakily. I spent years surviving. A pause, taking care of people, carrying responsibilities. making myself emotionally smaller so everyone else could function comfortably. Her voice cracked slightly now. And now, I'm exhausted. The honesty hit hard. Not angry, not dramatic, just truthful exhaustion. Ethan moved closer carefully. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. But that's the problem. Tears finally slipped down her face. I don't know who I am when I'm not carrying something. Silence filled the office. And Ethan realized then that Naomi's pain ran deeper than grief alone. She had spent so long being needed that she never learned how to simply exist for herself. Educational truth. People who constantly care for others often forget they deserve care too. I wish I met you later, Naomi whispered suddenly. Ethan froze. What? She looked away. Maybe after therapy. A painful smile appeared briefly. After healing. Another pause. After we both learned how to love people without hurting them. The vulnerability in her words terrified him, because deep down, he understood exactly what she meant. Timing matters in relationships. Growth matters. Emotional readiness matters. Sometimes two people can genuinely care about each other and still meet at the wrong stage of life. Naomi, I love you. The confession silenced the entire room. Tears filled her eyes immediately afterward. Not relief. Sadness. Because sometimes love arrives before people are healthy enough to sustain it properly. Ethan stared at her speechless, and quietly, honestly, he realized he loved her too. Not obsession, not possession. Love, real love. The kind built slowly through vulnerability, pain, presence, and emotional truth. He stepped toward her carefully, but Naomi stepped back. That hurt more than he expected. I can't do this right now, she whispered. Do what? Lose myself again. You won't. You don't know that. The fear in her voice carried painful honesty. Because love with emotionally complicated people can slowly become emotional self-abandonment if boundaries disappear. Naomi grabbed her bag quickly. I need space. Ethan's chest tightened instantly. How much space? She looked at him with tears in her eyes. I don't know. Then she walked away. And suddenly, the office felt unbearably empty again. 2 weeks later. Naomi resigned. No dramatic speech. No emotional scene. Just one envelope left quietly on Ethan's desk. He stared at the letter for almost an hour before finally opening it. Her handwriting looked painfully familiar. Ethan, meeting you changed my life in ways I never expected. You taught me that people can grow, that broken people are still capable of becoming softer, and that vulnerability is not weakness. But I also learned something about myself. I don't know how to love someone without disappearing inside their needs yet, and you're still learning how to let people love you without pushing them away. Maybe one day we'll become the kind of people who can meet each other in a healthier place. But right now, staying would hurt us both. Take care of your heart this time. Not just medically, emotionally too, Naomi. By the time Ethan reached her apartment, she was already gone, 3 years later. The first thing people noticed about Ethan Cole now was how much quieter he had become, not weaker, not less intelligent, just different. The sharp arrogance that once intimidated entire boardrooms had softened into calm restraint. He still commanded respect, but no longer through fear alone. Therapy changed him. Almost dying changed him. Losing Naomi changed him most of all. Educational truth. Real growth is usually quiet. People who truly change rarely need to announce it constantly. Coal dynamics had changed too. Work hour policies improved. Mental health support expanded. Leadership training became mandatory. Employee turnover dropped dramatically. Executives privately joked that Ethan's near-death experience made him human. But Claire knew better. It wasn't just mortality, it was love, loss, and regret. Ethan never spoke publicly about Naomi, but her absence lived quietly inside almost every meaningful decision he made afterward. Meanwhile, several states away in North Carolina, Naomi Bennett built an entirely different life. Smaller apartment, smaller salary, less prestige, but more peace. After leaving New York, she spent nearly a year emotionally rebuilding herself. Therapy helped her recognize how deeply caregiving and emotional self-sacrifice shaped her identity for years. For the first time in her adult life, Naomi learned how to exist without constantly rescuing everyone around her. She now worked as operations director for a non-profit healthcare organization focused on elderly patient advocacy. The work mattered to her deeply because grief had transformed into purpose instead of bitterness. And slowly, she became happy again, not perfectly healed, not untouched by the past, but steadier, stronger. Still, some nights, Ethan returned to her thoughts unexpectedly. A certain song, a business article with his photograph, a rainy evening reminding her of hospital hallways and conversations they never finished. Love doesn't always disappear, simply because distance becomes necessary. Sometimes it changes shape quietly, and waits inside memory. On a cold November afternoon, Naomi stepped into a national healthcare leadership conference in Chicago, carrying presentation folders and coffee. The ballroom buzzed with executives, non-profit directors, investors, and media representatives. Completely normal day, until she looked up and saw Ethan. Across the room, 3 years vanished instantly. Her breath caught so sharply she nearly dropped the folders in her hands. Ethan froze too. For one suspended moment, neither moved. The world around them continued normally. People talking, laughing, walking, while both stood emotionally stunned by the reality of each other existing in the same space again. Naomi noticed the changes first. He looked healthier now, less exhausted, more grounded somehow. But his eyes still carried the same quiet loneliness she recognized years ago. Except now, there was softness there too. And Ethan immediately noticed something different about Naomi. Peace, not perfect happiness, not complete healing, but emotional steadiness. She no longer looked like someone surviving every minute. And somehow, that made her even more beautiful than before. Neither knew who moved first. Only that suddenly, they stood face to face after 3 years of silence. "Hi," Naomi said softly. Ethan stared at her for half a second too long before answering. "Hi." God. Even hearing her voice again affected him immediately. Naomi adjusted the folders slightly in her arms. "I didn't know you'd be here. Coal Dynamics sponsors part of the conference now. That sounds surprisingly generous." A faint smile crossed Ethan's face. "You'd be shocked how much I've changed. I heard rumors. You heard about the therapy?" Naomi laughed softly, and just like that, some of the tension eased slightly. "Not gone, never gone, but softer. Your presentation starts in 20 minutes, Ethan said quietly. Naomi blinked in surprise. "You looked at the schedule? I saw your name this morning." The honesty of the admission warmed something inside her unexpectedly. Before either could continue, another executive approached Ethan quickly. "Mr. Cole, investors are waiting upstairs." Ethan barely looked away from Naomi. "I'll be there shortly." The man nodded awkwardly and disappeared again. Naomi noticed it immediately. Old Ethan would have prioritized business without hesitation. New Ethan stayed. "How have you been?" he asked carefully. Naomi hesitated. "How do you summarize 3 years of healing to someone who helped break you emotionally and also helped rebuild parts of you?" "Better," she answered honestly. "You." Ethan nodded slowly. "Learning." The simplicity of the word carried enormous weight. Learning how to apologize properly, how to show up consistently, how to maintain relationships, how to exist emotionally, without hiding behind work. Learning how badly he failed before. Naomi studied him quietly. "You look healthier. My doctors became terrifying after the heart incident. That's usually how doctors work." Another small smile, another dangerous moment of comfort. Then silence settled briefly. Not awkward, just full. Ethan finally spoke carefully. "I looked for you." Naomi's heart tightened instantly. "What?" "After you left." A pause. "I respected your space, but I still checked sometimes." His eyes lowered briefly, mostly to make sure you were okay. The honesty touched her more deeply than she expected, because it didn't feel possessive. It felt caring. "Mature? You could have called," she said softly. "I wanted to." A faint, painful smile appeared. "But I finally understood that loving someone also means respecting what they need from you." That sentence alone proved how much he'd changed. Old Ethan would have chased control. New Ethan learned restraint. Educational truth. Growth often reveals itself through patience rather than intensity. Naomi's eyes softened. "I'm glad you learned that." Ethan looked at her carefully for several moments, then quietly admitted, "I missed you." There it was. Simple, honest, unprotected. And Naomi realized something frightening then. Part of her missed him every day too. Before she could answer, conference organizers called attendees toward the main ballroom. Reality interrupted again. Naomi adjusted her folders slowly. "I should go." Ethan nodded. "Your presentation?" "Yes. I'd like to watch it." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Not obligation, not politeness, genuine interest. Naomi hesitated briefly before answering softly, "Okay." 2 hours later, Ethan sat near the back of the crowded ballroom, listening to Naomi speak about caregiver burnout and emotional neglect in healthcare systems. She stood confidently beneath stage lights, explaining how many caregivers lose their identities while constantly supporting others, and Ethan felt emotional listening to her, because every word carried pieces of the woman he once knew, and pieces of the woman she became after leaving him. At one point, Naomi said something that made his chest tighten immediately. People cannot continuously pour into others while remaining emotionally empty themselves. A pause. Eventually, exhaustion turns into invisibility, even to the person experiencing it. The audience applauded heavily, but Ethan barely noticed. because suddenly he remembered her standing in his office years earlier, saying, "I don't know who I am when I'm not carrying something." Back then, he loved her emotionally, but didn't fully understand her pain. Now he finally did. And that realization hurt almost as much as losing her the first time. After the presentation ended, people surrounded Naomi almost immediately. Healthcare directors praised her research. Conference organizers requested future collaborations. Several attendees thanked her personally for speaking honestly about caregiver exhaustion. Ethan watched quietly from the back of the ballroom, and for the first time in years, he felt proud of someone in a way completely unrelated to business success. Not because Naomi impressed investors, not because she increased profits, but because she transformed pain into something meaningful for others. Educational truth: healing becomes powerful when people use their experiences to help others feel less alone. Eventually the crowd around Naomi thinned. She spotted Ethan still standing near the back, and walked toward him slowly. "Well?" she asked softly. Ethan shook his head slightly in disbelief. "You were incredible." Naomi laughed lightly. That sounded painfully sincere. It was. She studied him carefully. 3 years ago, compliments from Ethan usually sounded restrained, strategic, or emotionally guarded. Tonight, they sounded genuine. "You really changed," she admitted quietly. Ethan looked down briefly, not quickly. A faint smile crossed his face. Therapy apparently hates shortcuts. That made her laugh again. And, God, he missed that sound. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Ethan carefully asked, "Dinner?" The question hung gently between them, not pressured, not demanding, just an invitation. Naomi hesitated. Part of her wanted to protect the emotional stability she fought hard to rebuild. But another part, the quieter, more honest part, still wanted him in ways time never fully erased. "One dinner," she said finally. Ethan nodded once. "That's fair." Later that evening, they sat inside a quiet restaurant overlooking the Chicago River. No executives, no hospital machines, no emotional emergencies. Just two people meeting each other again after years apart. And, strangely, the calmness felt more intimate than all the emotionally intense moments they shared before. Growth changes the way people connect. Naomi stirred her tea slowly, while Ethan watched city lights reflect across the water outside. "You stopped wearing armor," she observed suddenly. Ethan blinked slightly. "What?" "Before, everything about you felt guarded." Her eyes studied him carefully. "Now, you actually seem present." He smiled faintly. "Therapist said I used work, like emotional camouflage." "She sounds expensive." "She absolutely is." Another soft laugh. Then Ethan's expression became more serious. "I read your resignation letter at least 100 times. Naomi looked down quietly. "I almost called you every day for months." "Why didn't you?" "Because I finally understood something." He paused carefully. Love doesn't become healthy just because feelings are strong. The maturity in his voice settled deeply inside her. 3 years ago, Ethan would have fought for closeness immediately, demanded solutions, pushed emotionally. Now, he simply told the truth. Naomi looked at him softly. "That's a hard lesson." "Yeah." A pause. "You were right to leave." The sentence stunned her. Not because she wanted validation, because accountability sounds profoundly different when someone fully accepts consequences without self-pity. "You really believe that?" "Yes." Ethan held her gaze steadily. "I loved you." A painful smile appeared briefly. "But I wasn't emotionally safe for you yet." Naomi's chest tightened. No defensiveness, no excuses, just truth. And suddenly, she realized something painful. Part of her had spent years wishing he would someday understand exactly this. "I loved you too," she admitted quietly. The words sat between them gently, not dramatic, not explosive, just honest. Ethan exhaled slowly as if hearing something both comforting and heartbreaking at once. Then Naomi added softly, "But love wasn't enough back then." "I know." And he did know now. Educational truth. Love without emotional maturity often becomes painful instead of healing. For several moments, silence settled comfortably again. Then Ethan asked carefully, "Are you happy?" Naomi thought about the question seriously, not performatively, not romantically. Honestly, yes, she answered finally. "Not every day, not perfectly." A small smile crossed her face. "But I like who I became after everything." Ethan's eyes softened immediately. "That matters. What about you?" He leaned back slightly. "I still have bad habits." A faint laugh escaped him. "I still overwork when stressed." Another pause. "But I don't hate my life anymore." That answer moved her more than she expected. Because years earlier, Ethan looked like a man emotionally trapped inside his own success. Now he looked lighter somehow. Still flawed, still human, but alive emotionally. Naomi studied him quietly. "Your mother?" "We're better." A warm softness entered his voice now. "I visit every month." Another pause. She likes reminding me how emotionally stupid I used to be. Naomi laughed softly. She's not wrong. No, she's not. The honesty between them tonight felt incredibly different from the past. No emotional games. No power imbalance. No pretending. Just two people finally meeting each other as healthier versions of themselves. Then, Ethan grew quieter. There's something I never told you. Naomi looked up carefully. When I collapsed. He swallowed slightly. The thing that terrified me most wasn't dying. Her heart tightened. It was realizing how many people I loved badly before I finally learned how. The vulnerability in his voice felt almost unbearable. Naomi stared at him silently, because deep down, she understood exactly what he meant. Some people are not cruel because they lack feelings. They're cruel because they lack emotional skills, vulnerability, self-awareness, healing, and unfortunately, people around them often get hurt while they figure it out. Ethan looked at her carefully. You deserved a better version of me than the one you met first. Tears filled Naomi's eyes unexpectedly. Not because the words were dramatic, because they were sincere. Educational truth, real apologies focus on understanding another person's pain, not defending intentions. Naomi looked down briefly before softly admitting something she hadn't planned to say aloud tonight. I used to wonder if leaving broke your heart the same way staying broke mine. Ethan's expression shifted instantly. Then quietly, it did. The honesty of that answer settled deeply between them. Outside the restaurant window, snow began falling softly across the river. Neither noticed immediately, because somewhere between grief, growth, separation, and healing, two people who once loved each other badly were finally learning how to love honestly. Then Ethan asked carefully, "What happens now?" Naomi looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time since seeing him again, she allowed herself to imagine something dangerous. Maybe people really could change. What happens now? The question lingered between them long after Ethan asked it. Outside, snow continued falling softly across the Chicago River, while warm restaurant lights reflected against the glass. Naomi looked at him carefully. 3 years ago, that question would have terrified her, because back then, loving Ethan felt emotionally consuming, unstable, unbalanced. Now, it felt different, calmer, like two people finally standing on equal emotional ground instead of trying to rescue each other from unresolved pain. "We don't rush," she answered softly. Relief flickered across Ethan's face immediately. Not disappointment. Relief, because old Ethan wanted certainty instantly. New Ethan understood. Trust rebuilds slowly. "That sounds reasonable," he said quietly. Naomi smiled faintly. "You saying the word reasonable might be the biggest evidence of personal growth." He laughed softly. God, she missed that laugh too. The next few months unfolded carefully. Not dramatic, not obsessive, intentional, and strangely, that made their connection stronger than before. Ethan visited North Carolina occasionally between conferences and meetings. Naomi traveled to New York twice for non-profit partnerships with Coal Dynamics healthcare initiatives. This time, everything felt different. There were boundaries, communication, honesty, no emotional guessing games, no public humiliation, no disappearing into silence whenever vulnerability became uncomfortable. Educational truth, healthy relationships are usually built through consistency, not emotional extremes. One Saturday afternoon, Ethan stood inside Naomi's nonprofit office, helping organize donated medical equipment, while volunteers moved around them. The old Ethan would never have spent weekends doing this. Not because he considered himself above it, because years ago he didn't know how to exist meaningfully outside work and control. Now he was learning. A volunteer walked past and smiled at Naomi. "Your boyfriend's actually useful." Naomi nearly dropped the clipboard in her hands. Ethan looked mildly amused. "Boyfriend?" The volunteer froze immediately. "Oh my God, I'm sorry. I assumed." "It's all right," Naomi interrupted quickly, embarrassed. But Ethan still looked entertained. After the volunteer disappeared, Naomi sighed dramatically. "This is your fault somehow." "My fault?" He looked offended playfully. "I was quietly carrying boxes. You looked too emotionally supportive while doing it." "That sounds serious." "It is." Their laughter faded into comfortable silence afterward. Then Ethan looked at her carefully. "You know." A small smile crossed his face. "A few years ago, you would have apologized for that assumption." Naomi realized he was right. Old Naomi constantly minimized herself emotionally, made herself smaller, safer, less visible. Now, she simply smiled softly. "I guess therapy was expensive for both of us." The growth between them no longer felt theoretical. It showed up in small moments. The way Ethan listened without interrupting now. The way Naomi expressed needs without apologizing for them. The way neither felt responsible for fixing the other's existence anymore. Love finally felt peaceful instead of emotionally exhausting. And that frightened Naomi slightly, Because people who survive emotionally difficult relationships often become suspicious of peace. A month later, Ethan invited Naomi to Boston for his mother's birthday dinner. The invitation mattered more than he realized. Because Ethan once separated love from family, vulnerability, and emotional integration, now he was inviting Naomi into real parts of his life instead of isolated emotional moments. His mother hugged Naomi warmly the second she arrived. "So this is the woman who finally forced my son into therapy." Ethan sighed. "Mom, what?" She smiled innocently. "I like her already." Claire nearly laughed into her wineglass. Throughout dinner, Naomi noticed something quietly beautiful. Ethan was different with his family now. Relaxed, present, emotionally available, not perfect, not magically healed, but trying consistently. Educational truth. Growth becomes real when it appears across every relationship, not just romantic ones. Later that evening, Naomi stood alone on the back porch, wrapped in Ethan's coat, while snow covered the quiet neighborhood outside. Ethan joined her a few minutes later. "My mother's obsessed with you already. She threatened to show me your childhood photos." "She absolutely will." Naomi laughed softly. Then Ethan grew quieter. "You know, I used to think vulnerability made people weak." Naomi looked toward him. "What changed?" "You." A pause, and almost losing everything important, "Because I refuse to let people truly know me." The honesty in his voice still affected her deeply. Not because he sounded perfect, because he sounded aware. Self-awareness changes relationships completely. Naomi stepped closer, slowly. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I trust you now in ways I never could before." Ethan's eyes softened immediately, even after everything. "Not because the past disappeared." Her voice remained gentle. "But because you finally stopped running from it." The emotional maturity inside that truth settled deeply between them. Then Ethan carefully reached for her hand. No pressure, no urgency, just quiet affection. And Naomi let him hold it, because for the first time, loving him no longer felt like abandoning herself. Months passed peacefully after that, not without disagreements, not without difficult conversations. But healthy conflict looks different from emotional instability. They communicated now, listened now, paused before reacting. And slowly, Naomi allowed herself to fully believe something she once thought impossible. Sometimes people really do become better versions of themselves. Then life tested them again. One rainy afternoon, Naomi received a phone call that changed everything. A major healthcare foundation in Seattle offered her a national leadership position. Higher salary, greater impact, huge opportunity. But it required relocation across the country. The old Naomi would have rejected it immediately to preserve a relationship. The new Naomi froze for an entirely different reason. She was terrified of losing herself again by making decisions based purely around love. That evening, she sat quietly inside her apartment staring at the offer letter, while Ethan cooked dinner nearby. "You've reread that paper 6 times, he observed. Naomi looked up slowly. "There's a job offer." Ethan immediately noticed her expression. "This sounds important." "It is." She handed him the letter carefully. Ethan read silently, and Naomi watched fear slowly rise inside herself. Not fear that he'd stop her, fear that she'd want him enough to stop herself. When Ethan finally looked up, his expression surprised her completely. "You should take it." Naomi blinked. "What?" "It's an incredible opportunity." "You're not upset?" "Of course I'm upset." He smiled sadly. "I love having you close to me." A pause. "But I'd never ask you to shrink your life to protect my comfort." The sentence hit her emotionally harder than any dramatic declaration ever could. Because years ago, Ethan would have unconsciously prioritized his emotional needs first. Now he prioritized her growth too. Educational truth. Real love supports expansion, not emotional limitation. Naomi's eyes filled slowly. "You really mean that?" "Yes." He stepped closer, carefully. "And if this relationship only survives while your world stays small, then we learned nothing." For several seconds, Naomi simply stared at him, because deep down, that moment healed something inside her that even therapy hadn't fully touched yet. The old Ethan feared distance, control loss, uncertainty. The new Ethan loved her enough to let her grow freely. And suddenly, Naomi realized something powerful. Real love does not ask people to abandon themselves to keep it alive. Tears filled her eyes quietly. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." Ethan stepped closer slowly. 3 years ago, I would have panicked. A faint laugh escaped him. "I probably would have offered you a promotion, emotional manipulation, and a penthouse." Naomi laughed through tears. "That sounds alarmingly accurate." "I know." His eyes softened. "But loving you taught me something important." A pause. "Keeping people close means nothing if they stop becoming themselves beside you." Educational truth. Healthy love creates emotional freedom, not emotional captivity. Naomi looked down at the offer letter again, then softly admitted, "I'm scared." "Of Seattle?" No. Her voice trembled slightly now, of finally having something good, and losing it anyway. The honesty settled heavily between them, because when people survive emotionally painful relationships or grief, fear of loss often remains long after healing begins. Ethan understood that now too. He gently took her hand. We're not the same people we were before. No. And long-distance relationships are difficult. Naomi laughed softly. That's the least romantic sentence ever spoken. I'm trying to be emotionally healthy. A small smile crossed his face. It's exhausting sometimes. She shook her head affectionately. Then Ethan's expression turned more serious again. But difficult doesn't automatically mean impossible. That mattered, because mature love doesn't promise fantasy. It promises effort. Weeks later, Naomi accepted the Seattle position. The goodbye at the airport felt emotional but different from the painful separation years earlier. No unresolved resentment, no emotional collapse, no running away to survive. Just two people choosing each other honestly while accepting uncertainty naturally exists in adult life. Ethan hugged her tightly near the security line. You know, he murmured softly, I still hate airports. Naomi smiled against his chest. You hate emotional vulnerability in public spaces. That too. She pulled back slightly to look at him. You'll visit? Constantly. A pause. My therapist says healthy attachment includes reasonable restraint, but honestly she might lose this argument. Naomi laughed again. Then her expression softened emotionally. Thank you. Ethan frowned slightly. For what? For becoming someone safe to love. The words visibly affected him, because deep down, he knew how hard-won that transformation had been. Not through money, not through success, through accountability. Pain, self-reflection, consistency, and through loving a woman honest enough to walk away when love alone wasn't healthy enough. He kissed her forehead gently. Go change lives, Naomi Bennett. 3 years earlier, those words would have sounded impossible coming from Ethan Cole. Now they sounded completely natural, because growth had reshaped him from the inside out. Seattle changed Naomi's life. The work challenged her emotionally and professionally in ways she genuinely enjoyed. She helped expand caregiver support programs nationwide and became respected for her deeply human approach to healthcare leadership. And through it all, she and Ethan stayed connected, not perfectly, not effortlessly. Real relationships rarely work that way. There were missed calls, stressful weeks, moments of loneliness, arguments about schedules and emotional availability. But this time, they communicated through problems instead of emotionally retreating from them. That made all the difference. Educational truth. Strong relationships are not built by avoiding conflict. They're built by learning how to navigate conflict without destroying connection. One rainy evening nearly a year later, Naomi returned home after an exhausting conference to find Ethan sitting outside her apartment building holding terrible grocery store flowers. She stopped walking immediately. What are you doing here? Ethan stood slowly. Well, originally, I planned a dramatic romantic surprise. He looked down at the flowers critically. Then the airport gift shop humbled me. Naomi burst into laughter. God, he loved that sound. You flew across the country with dying flowers. I'd like credit for emotional effort. She shook her head while smiling. Then Ethan's expression softened. I missed you. The simple honesty still melted her every time. Naomi stepped closer. I missed you too. For several seconds, neither moved. Rain tapped softly around them, while city lights blurred behind wet streets. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket slowly. Naomi blinked in surprise. Ethan. It's not pressure, he said immediately. And you can absolutely say no. A nervous breath escaped him. I just realized, there's nobody else I want to build a life with. He opened the small box carefully. Not flashy, not enormous, just beautiful, simple, intentional, very different from the man he used to be. Naomi stared at the ring silently while emotions overwhelmed her chest. Years ago, a proposal from Ethan might have felt emotionally dangerous. Now, it felt peaceful, safe, because he no longer loved her like a man trying to fill emotional emptiness. He loved her, like someone finally emotionally whole enough to share life honestly. You once told me relationships are easier to maintain than repair, Ethan said softly. A faint smile appeared. Took me a long time to understand what you meant. Tears filled Naomi's eyes immediately. And now? Now I know love survives through maintenance. A pause. Through listening. Accountability. Showing up. Telling the truth before resentment grows. His voice softened deeply, and choosing each other repeatedly. Educational truth. Lasting love is rarely built on intensity alone. It's built on emotional responsibility. Naomi looked at him through tears, then quietly laughed. You really did become emotionally intelligent. Terrifying development, honestly. She smiled fully now. And after everything, the grief, the distance, the mistakes, the growth, the years apart, Naomi finally answered, "Yes." Relief and happiness crashed across Ethan's face instantly. He pulled her into his arms while rain continued falling around them. Not a perfect fairy tale ending. Not two flawless people magically healed forever. Just two human beings who learned painful lessons before finally loving each other well. And somehow, that made their love stronger than fantasy ever could. Years later, Naomi would sometimes think back to the frightened man collapsing beneath ballroom lights, and the exhausted woman trying desperately to save him. Back then, neither understood what was really happening. It wasn't just a medical emergency. It was the beginning of two people learning that love alone is not enough. People must also learn how to communicate, how to heal, how to apologize, how to grow, and how to stop making pain everyone else's responsibility. Because real love is not about rescuing broken people. It's about becoming healthy enough to stop breaking each other. And, in the end, that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe people can truly change for love? Or does real change only happen when people finally choose to face themselves honestly? Until next time, remember this: the quietest people are often carrying the deepest strength. And sometimes the people we underestimate become the very people who save our lives. Before you leave, take a moment to think about this. Have you ever met someone at the wrong time? Then wondered what could have happened if both of you had healed first? And do you believe love can truly survive distance, pain, mistakes, and personal growth? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story might help someone else who's struggling to choose between love and self-worth right now. If this emotional journey touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications for more powerful American love stories filled with real-life lessons, emotional healing, second chances, and unforgettable endings. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories are not about finding perfect people. They're about two imperfect people becoming better before finding their way back to each other.